The more we fight together, the more we fight together, and stronger we shall be. Rising sun, rising sun. Biafra is the only hope of Africa. Biafra is the only hope of Africa. Believe it or leave it, Biafra is the only hope of Africa. We've been crying, the world claim not to hear. And we've been lamenting, the world claim not to hear. Our tears flow, the world claim not to see. And our blood flow, the world claim not to see. This is a crime, oh no, against humanity. Oh no, yeah, this is a crime. Eritrea's poor, they were given independence. South Sudan's poor, they were given independence. Namibia's poor, they were given independence. Give me the reason my people got to be neglected. Give me the reason my people got to be rejected. Give me the reason our freedom got to be a crime. Give me the reason our own freedom got to be denied. Hey, Biafra is the only hope of Africa. I tell you what, Biafra is the only hope of Africa. Hey, Biafra is the only hope of Africa.
Hotep Abaragane Mangonani Sabona Mache Nangadef Akwaba. You're in the great show on Galaxy Radio with your host Kwame. You're listening to the only D brainwashing station coming to live from somewhere in London. You might be listening to us on 102.5 FM or www.galaxyfm.com, or it may be tune in on your mobile phone. Whichever way you're listening to Galaxy Radio, you're listening to the big one, you're listening to the only one, you're listening to the only D brainwashing station coming to live from somewhere in London. At this moment in time, I want to give you the live links numbers, and I'm telling you to write it down, because if you're new listeners, it's important that you write them down so that you can take part in the program when appropriate. And it's a very interesting topic we have on this morning, and I do want to get into it as soon as possible because it's going to take as much time. I think it's going to take a lot of time, this particular topic, so I need to give it as much energy as possible. Okay, so the live link numbers are, if you're ringing from outside of the UK, it's 011-44-207-193-0174. Or you could just ring +44-207-193-0174. Or if you're ringing from the UK, it's okay. Just ring 0207-193-0174. That's 0207-193-0174. Right, if you want to send a text in or you want to speak to me after the program, then this is the number to ring. Outside of UK again, it's 011-44-73-77-92-0703, or just +44-73 77 92 0703, or you could just ring, if you're inside the UK, 073 77 92 0703. That's 073 77 92 0703. There is a Skype address, a Skype name if you have Skype to Skype, which is Galaxy Affiliate Station. That's Galaxy Affiliate Station generally. If you send a request in, and the engineers will accept you, and we will be good to go. So I don't know if it's possible for you to do it this morning if you're abroad listening, but whatever the case might be, send a request in for the future. Okay, I've got in the studio Brother Justice from Biafra, which is a place in Nigeria. I know he's going to dispute that, but anyway, Biafra is a place in Africa. I know he won't be disputing that one. Right, so Brother Justice, if you could introduce yourself, and then you introduce the organization of that you represent, yeah?
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a great honor to be in this studio. Thank our brother Kwame and brother Cecil for this invitation. My name is Justice Ukachi-Lois. I am the UK, United Kingdom National Coordinator for the indigenous people of Biafra. Now, as Kwame said, Biafra is in Africa. Without getting too controversial, if you look in the ancient maps, even as far back in 1600s, you see the word or the area designated Biafra. So there's no argument about where Biafra is. Now, most of us understand it's also in Nigeria currently, and that's probably what we need to
that big
about.
Sea area of Nigeria is actually called the Gulf of Biafra, isn't it?
Indeed.
Long before Nigeria became
Absolutely.
a state of
Absolutely,
any kind.
absolutely. So there's a bite of Biafra, or bite of Biafra, long before Nigeria became known as a country, and that's so. If it existed in the 1600s and Nigeria got its independence in 1960, so Biafra obviously existed before, but. And the issue now is whether it's inside Nigeria or is Nigeria inside Biafra. But we're going to go into that. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity and privilege to share what little knowledge I have on this huge nebulous topic. But if the process or the actual outcome is to help everybody understand the situation on the ground, and also to help us as Africans to stop further bloodshed in that part of the world, we'll all be grateful. Thank you.
Okay, so if you could give a brief history of the organization you represent?
Yes. IPOB, Indigenous People of Biafra, is an organization which is like a movement. A movement in the sense that it's in over 88 countries in the world. And this is occasioned because of the fact that most people who were indigenous to Biafra, which is part of the Nigeria, let's say for geographic location, have found themselves scattered all over the world. So you have people within the area of their indigene, which is Biafra within Nigeria, and also the rest of the African continent. And there's a saying that where you don't find an Biafran, then that place is not safe. So we are really everywhere. So it's an organization which, like an umbrella group, which try to unite them all to fight a common cause, which by implication, if we stabilize this part of Africa, the whole thing will spread to the rest of Africa. So we are in several countries. I happen to be one of the coordinators in the United Kingdom. So if you go to Germany, you find IPOB. If you go to France, you find IPOB, Ireland, and so on and so forth. But of course, the majority of people live in Biafra land itself. And this is what we're going to explore a bit further. Thank you.
And the common cause is, what's the aim of the organization?
Right. The aim is to have a peaceful restoration of a country we call Biafra. which, as I said earlier, existed way in the ancient days. And if we can restore it, then in a peaceful manner, because we've been through war, which I suppose we can talk about later, there's no need killing each other again to establish what you already have. So this particular organization is going for a peaceful agitation for the restoration of their sovereignty, which is Biafra.
And that means succeeding from Nigeria.
People call it seceding. People call it seceding. When you use the word secede, it means you're going to, literally price yourself away. But in 1967, when the first word was used, I said Biafra, part of Nigeria, was seceding. It was with the understanding that you're a part of a country and you're forcing to go away from it. But if you have been pushed out from one part of the country and you return to your village, you can't be saying you seceded from your from other parts. From the way the world will look at it, as though you're pulling away. But the Biafran experience was that they were in other parts of Nigeria and they were pushed out of that, so nowhere else was safe until they got back to their own fatherland, as it were. And because of the rejection and all the efforts to have peace failed, they declared themselves as a separate part of the country, hoping that in so doing they'll be left alone and no further bloodshed. Unknown to them, that declaration was a signal for Nigeria to say, well, we have this territorial integrity, you can't go out. So they killed them to kick them out, they killed them to bring them back in, and the killing is still going on. So the IPOB is trying to bring an end to all this killing.
Okay. Right. If you could give us a brief history.
May I assist briefly?
Yes.
You speak of the indigenous people of Biafra.
Yes.
Everybody knows that, in a way, it's Igbo land. So who else is there?
Okay. When we look at the whole map of, if you like, Nigeria, there's a section called Igbo land. The issues like, what's the best way to... You don't really know where the boundary is, because if you imagine Nigeria as an artificial creation, and if you look at the African map, it's in boxes, isn't it? So there's an artificial creation. So there's a portion of that artificial creation which you call the Igbos live here. But they have neighbors like other tribes, like the Efik, like the Ibibio, the Ogojas, and so on. And you keep listing them. It's like if you move from one part of your village and go further down, they speak a slightly different dialect. But the way they see the world view is similar. They have the same cultural identity and understanding. So it's difficult to price them apart. And the mistake people make, or the British make, is say, but you're Igbo and you want to colonize the next tribe. It's not like that. So there's a definite area through marriage, cultural acclimatization. They're actually one. They see themselves as one. So when Biafra was declared, it was an eastern part of Nigeria, which included not just the Igbos, although the Igbos are the majority. There are other tribes which obviously constituted the then Biafra declaration.
Are there some people call it Igoni?
Now, there's a portion of this Biafra is also called Ogoni. That's a tribe, which is Ogoni tribe.
So if they wanted autonomy from Biafra, what would be your position on
Interesting, because the Biafrans, they have in their head it's autonomy. You can't force them to do what they don't want. So every single tribe that make up...
Let's call them people.
Because tribe is very nebulous.
Not just nebulous, it's a kind of negative European notion.
Indeed. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So every group of people that constitute that geographic space, if they want to have their own autonomy, that's welcome. There's no... The thing is, autonomy is because we're being suppressed. Majority of the time is due to people being marginalized or discriminated against. So they want their own autonomy. But all these communities actually are fractionated. Even in the Igbo land, they have different communities which are fractionated. And that is what makes it difficult to appreciate the Igbo. They have this concept that the Igbo don't have a king, or Igbo something like that, which means they don't have one person central and say, I want you to do this. So because each community has its autonomy, so it's inbuilt in their system. And as a result of that inbuilt autonomy, if there's an issue, a village will nominate someone to go and talk on their behalf. And after that discussion, that ends there. You don't carry on representing them. So when the British arrived, they found it very difficult to deal with because they want to talk to who's in charge. There's no one who is in charge. And that's a different concept for everywhere else they've been to. But other parts of Nigeria, they do have something like a ruler, an emir, and they can talk to them who then filtered information down. In the Biafran setting, you don't have this overall ruler. So every village is autonomous. So the Goni people will be autonomous. The Efik are autonomous, and so on. And the combination of all this makes what we call United States of Biafra.
Okay. So that's what the juridical entity, the new state.
That's right. Would be
very old, but now new in the international scene.
Indeed,
would be. It'd be a United States of Biafra, or United Peoples of Biafra.
Absolutely.
All right. We know that there was a civil war in the 60s, and I was around, so I know just how brutal and awful it was. I don't know if before your time?
I was in it.
There you go. All right.
As a child, I survived it.
Right, so you know better than me. All right. So one of the things that I think people have to understand is how that came about, how that actual war between, as it were, the northern part of Nigeria and the western part of Nigeria fighting together to keep the eastern part of Nigeria in a state then called Nigeria, actually still called Nigeria. So how did that come about?
Okay, before you go to that, what I wanted to give a brief history of the area today known as Nigeria. Like who was the people them there before, and what contribution did they make towards human development?
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a much nebulous. Fine. So the geographical space. I'm glad you used the term geographical space called Nigeria. Came about by slowly accumulating territories by the British government. What happened was that when the scramble for Africa, basically we all know about slave trade. When that ended, when they got enough, I'm coming to it. Because the slavery occurred, then they stopped taking human capital out of Africa. Now they come back into the African. They had to now, because they used to collect human slaves at the coast. They couldn't go inside because they don't know quite what's going on. So people used to be brought to them at the coast. So when slavery ended, they now have to find a way of getting more resources. So this is the beginning of colonization. Now, all those countries were not, there's no hard fixed boundary which you could say, this country, I want to now come and colonize you. So they did it by stealth, gradually trading. So the French were coming, the British were coming, so they were actually fighting among each other. And the European, being Europeans, they came they went to Germany and sat on a table and carved up Africa like a turkey. So the reason why Nigeria
or a fish.
Or a fish. So they had a dinner. They had a dinner party. So they said, all right, you want the leg bit? I'm sticking to my chicken. You want the leg bit? Okay, we give you the leg bit. I'll take the arm. I take the chest or whatever. You understand? So to stop the Europeans fighting among each other. So when it came to Nigeria, the French were coming from the north and from the west. And then the British sneaked in from the coast and went up to confront the West and to confront the French. So there was, therefore, a deliberate ploy by the British. They started trading at the coast and they gradually moved up to the north. So unknown to them, there was in the north what we call an established empire which is Islamic, and they were coming down to the south coast. They were coming down to move Islam all the way down to the southern coast. And if you like, in West Africa, is that eastern part which became Biafra that hasn't been Islamized. So there was an intention to bring Islam down south coast. So the British met it.
And much of the West wasn't Islamized either, the Yoruba people.
Indeed, they were half and half. So they met this, the British met this intended conquest, if you like, head on, to stop them coming down and taking more slaves. There was a fight to stop that. So the British, under a soldier, a colonial soldier called Lugard, sent his military to try and conquer the all-conquering Islamic forces. They were very, very upset with that, because they thought if the British wasn't there, they would have conquered the whole country. So we have to bear that in mind. But the British conquered the north because the north was conquered by the Fulani, a tribe called Fulani. I'm going to quickly introduce them. A people called Fulani, who took on the indigenous people called the Hausas in the northern part of Nigeria. And they subdued them and also sent what they call the emirs. Each town or the area they conquered, they had a Fulani person ruling it.
A kind of a big chief.
Indeed. So they call it emirs. Now, those emirs confronted the British. And British conquered them because the people the emirs conquered, the houses, didn't like to be conquered by the Fulanis. So it was easier for the British to conquer the Fulanis, if you imagine what's going on. So the British conquest of the Fulanis was easier than they would have admitted if the whole of the north was behind and fighting the British. So the British said we had a Maxim, the machine gun, so it was easier for them because you have this. Anyway, so they conquered the northern Nigeria, where the Fulanis were predominant in ruling. And then the Fulani played, say, right, okay, you conquered us, we understand. In fact, Lugard himself said, by the same authority you used to subdue the houses, we're using it to subdue you. So, but what they did was to allow them to carry on ruling that part.
Indirect rule is called in the books.
So, that's a very, very strange thing. You conquer them and say, but you can carry on ruling as you have been ruling, but we are in charge now.
It suited the British very well.
It suited them because they didn't have the manpower to administer the whole area. They used the indigenous people who are ruling it to maintain that. So that is up in the north. That's a huge geographical area. But when it came to the south, there was a slightly different scenario.
First which happened before that.
It happened before that because in order to get to the north, you have to come from the south. So they bombarded a place like Lagos with a naval gunship, and those ones just caved in because you can't really fight naval gunship. The British had a mighty navy. They conquered the east as well, and they merged east with the west. So they now and called it Southern Nigeria or Protectorate. I don't know who they're protecting. So they call it Southern Protectorate. And the Southern Protectorate were merged as a result of Lagos, the west and the east. Remember, the capital was originally in Calabar, which is in the east. And I'm sure my brothers in West Indies know about Calabar school and so on.
We have a college in Jamaica by that name.
Calabar. Yes, so it's actually indigenous to that part. So therefore, you had the southern part with Protectorate, then merged with the northern part which has been conquered, which became the Nigeria. So you have the Southern Protectorate merged with the Northern Protectorate in 1914. This when all this happened.
Let's get back to that. I think that my brother Kwame was asking something else. Before all of that, the area that we call Nigeria has a culture, and it's very impressive. It's the first place outside of Egypt. It's the first place that excited me because it has Benin and Ife and Igbo Ukwu and all of that wonderful and Nok and all of that. I think when he said, "What is its contribution to human culture?" that perhaps is what he was asking you to talk about. So, if you
phenomenal contribution, phenomenal contribution. I suppose. The Benin culture, for example, if you go to the bronze, they are really masters of it. And what the British did, before they merged into Southern Protectorate, the Benin culture had their own military. They resisted the British invasion force.
Yeah, 400 years.
Yeah,
yes.
And then British then sent an expedition force to totally wipe them out.
1896 or 97.
Indeed. And as a result of complete destruction of the Benin Kingdom, they grabbed all the artifact and brought it to the British. In fact, I think 2 days ago I read somewhere saying, we want our statues back.
The Nigerians have been asking for that for the longest while. They offer to loan it. They say it's dangerous to hand it back. You don't have sufficient the right condition there to protect it. All kind of arguments. They say we didn't really steal it. It was legitimate.
We captured it. We found it. So it's usually it's the same thing as the Greek marbles.
Absolutely.
Isn't it? So the culture, when you look at them, the intricacy of it is phenomenal. I personally saw an exhibition many years ago when I was at university. When they came to London of the artwork. And we mentioned Benin. We also, when they come to the eastern part, they also had this amazing, delicate exhibition. The pot with the weave, right? They also had that you can really appreciate the advance in their culture. Then in the north, they also had their own Islamic way of doing things. So the Nook culture was also, we're talking centuries ago.
Yes.
But
it's actually more than centuries.
Yes.
The
ancient times,
the foundation culture, the earliest thing that the archaeologists talk about is the Nok culture, and it's now agreed that you can date it back to about 1000 BC.
Absolutely.
So we're not talking about centuries. We're actually talking about millennia. We're talking about 3 millennia.
I agree.
Of a continuous culture that has connections.
That's right.
In artistic material that uses bronze, that uses ivory, that uses wood, which doesn't last very long, and that also uses baked pottery, which does last very long if it's not in wet conditions.
Absolutely.
So we actually have, because all of this stuff is preserved, evidence of the quality of that cultural connection and reality that does in fact go back 3,000 years.
And you also have pyramids built. A place like Udi in the eastern part, there are pyramids which most people don't know about. So to talk about what have they contributed, it's not just in that culture. Their music, their artwork, and of course the history. You only need to listen to some of their languages. Some of us have certificates put in the drawer, but those people, their wisdom in their idioms will make you understand they were really advanced cultures.
And speaking of the language, one of the fascinating things is that the Hausa, who the Igbos may not particularly like, I don't know, but the Hausa have this wonderfully, I'm sure it's not actually more intricate than anybody else's, but the Western linguists regard it as a phenomenally complicated and impressive language. There's a reservoir of all kinds of cultural stuff, and they've suddenly decided that it's not really an African language at all, because every time something of cultural that they recognize as of cultural significance is found in Africa, it cannot be African. So I think on this program we were saying a few weeks ago, so the Hausa language, because of its riches, is not African. The Ife bronzes, which were rediscovered in the early 20th century, the first one in 1910, and then a whole set of them in Ife in the Olokon Grove, as you probably know, in the 1920s. Once that stuff was discovered, clearly, artistically, it's on a match with ancient Egypt and with ancient Greece. Absolutely. They don't talk about ancient Egypt. They say that the Greeks must have come across the Mediterranean, come across the Sahara, come another 1,000 miles down across the grassland and the forest, and taught these Africans how to do to do this stuff. Even though, in point of fact, Greece's flowering is 500 or 600 BC, and we now know that the Nok stuff is at least 500 years older, and probably even older than that. So it makes no sense at all. And they do the same thing with Great Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe is this phenomenal monument, probably 13th century, and they get there, they see it, and it cannot be African. So I have a little book title of it is The Arab Builders of Great Zimbabwe, and they have these people in Arab dress who they're saying went all the way down the Indian Ocean, and then how far up into Africa is Great Zimbabwe? It's at least 1,500 miles, probably 2,000 miles. Africa is vast, and they say that these people left from wherever in the Arab world they came from. Leave aside the fact that the Arabs are actually mostly black people, but leave that aside, and come down, get up in the middle of Africa, and build this thing.
Yes. Yeah.
And the problem with that one, there's so many problems with it, is that although Great Zimbabwe is the biggest of these stone cities, in fact, the Mashonaland, which is effectively where they are, that includes part of Zimbabwe and part of Mozambique, is full of stone cities, as I think I was saying on this program a few weeks ago. So that's what we find.
Yes.
They cut off the north of Africa and say that's not Africa. And then even when in the now Africa south of the Sahara, sub-Saharan Africa, you put it sub, it must be inferior. And then you find stuff there. How do you explain that these people were supposed to be primitive, non-creative, have done stuff? So the explanation is that they really didn't do it. The Portuguese helped the Benin to make their their bronzes, or the Greeks helped their predecessors to the people of Ife to make their bronzes, or they don't bother to know that those people were part of a tradition that stretched back before Greece. Leave aside the Egyptian connection or the Ethiopian connection. Yeah,
absolutely, because the Herodotus was known as a Greek historian.
He was indeed.
If he's the father of history, he wrote about Africa.
Yes.
But you can be a father of history writing about history that's already been made.
Yes.
So everything African, like the building the pyramids, all the advanced technology, they always try to find it impossible to attribute it or to ascribe it to black people.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the bottom line.
Absolutely.
So the civilization is for them to see and acknowledge they actually belong to black people.
Yes.
And they try everything to denigrate. I think it was Napoleon who chopped up the
nose of the Sphinx. Yes,
because he couldn't believe.
Didn't he shot it off?
So, that for him, it can't possibly be black nose. It can't. To answer your question, civilization in Africa, wherever you look, you find. In fact, there were more pyramids, weren't there, in Sudan?
Yes, absolutely. Than in Egypt. Yeah, absolutely.
So people don't say that. So the black people. They were, from point of view of contribution to civilization, they're highly advanced. And the Renaissance they talk about in France.
We invented human culture first, and then human civilization. And everything that they call civilization. Literature, music, the arts, medicine, scientific technology, and so on. All of that starts in Africa.
So what they did was to conquer Egypt and burn all the books that will support. But the hieroglyphics, all the writing is still there for them to see.
Let's just look briefly at that burning process before. Right. So, and it's legitimate, because what we're really talking about is African contribution to world civilization, and we're focusing on Nigeria, but it connects the whole of the continent. So that burning process, it doesn't start with Napoleon. When the Greeks arrive and conquer Egypt, they collect up Egyptian books that are scattered. Scattered is the wrong word. That are located in the temples throughout Egypt.
That's right.
So they scatter them up and they put them in a library in Alexandria. And people talk about this as a Greek library. Nothing Greek about it. Greeks never had any books to put in no library. They've been writing for about 400 years by then, and most of the stuff that they'd written was stolen, imitated, whatever from ancient ancient Egypt. So all of this stuff gets collected up in effectively two different entities in Alexandria and so on. And then the Romans arrive and the burning process starts. There's either an accidental or a deliberate fire at the time of Mark Antony in that war between him and another Caesar. The stuff
Pompey.
The stuff that takes place around
it could be Pompey, Alexander.
Around what the queen did name?
Queen Cleopatra.
Queen Cleopatra, exactly so. And so the burning begins then.
Yes.
And then the Arabs arrive,
Yes.
and they do some burning.
Yeah.
And before the Arabs, the Christians who don't like this heritage of pagan, because Jesus is not celebrated in it, they burn some of that stuff. And so the burning, the destruction and stealing thing has been going on for at least 1,100 and something years. Horrible stuff. Yeah.
So there's a lot we can say the contribution. So if it doesn't matter where you go in Africa, when you look hard enough, you find advanced civilization.
Yes.
But the West will say, "Oh, it must have come from alien culture.
Yes.
They must have come from outside." And that's really where we are.
And the on the burning stuff, all right, because in addition to Egypt, Ethiopia, and that northeast Africa being a real residue of African civilization, you also have stuff that develops in the north of Nigeria, in places like Senegal, just to the north of Senegal, Mali, and right, Timbuktu, all of that. They are full of manuscripts. Most of the manuscripts are in Arabic, but not at all exclusively in Arabic. And most of it is still there, or if not most, a whole heap, gigantic amounts of manuscripts that contain all kinds of knowledge is still there. And those people who don't like indigenous African language, even if it's in African knowledge, even if it's in their language, because they're Arabic. So right now, Islamists are busy in Mali, in Timbuktu. The French are trying to stop them. God knows why the French are trying to stop them. And the UN, and see why the UN is trying to. But that burning process happening, because just as in Afghanistan, there's some Islamic barbarians. And they destroy stuff that's non-Islamic because they see it as, well, just not Islamic, and therefore not in praise of Allah. And it doesn't matter how old it is, it doesn't matter whether it predates Allah and Islam or not. They set about to destroy it. And a lot of that is happening in the Sahel, just to the south of the Sahara right now. So these processes are alive and still damaging our culture, historical heritage.
And our headache now is those who have been privileged to read a little bit is to make sure our people understand all this.
Absolutely,
so
yes.
The history belongs to history books, but we're going to bring it alive. It's the knowledge we impart to the next generation that's important, to empower them to realize, hang on, what's this about Africans being inferior? That's not right. And that's really the message I want to. So I don't know if that's answered your.
Just one last point about that before we return to modern Nigeria.
Okay.
This burning and destruction and denial, this cutting off of the north of Africa, of Egypt, and saying that it wasn't African, wasn't black, that serves a real function, right? Because when the Europeans arrive in India or in China, which they did, or in Japan, or even in Mexico, they see and acknowledge at once that they are in the presence of old, deep culture. You don't want to do that in Africa, but there is evidence of that also in Africa. So what they do is deny the African nature of what they discover there. So when you talk to an Indian or a Chinaman, he knows that I belong to a culture that has all this ancient books and artifacts and so on. When you talk to an African, because of what the Europeans have done to us, we don't know how rich our culture is. We don't know that we're at the head of Africa, of world civilization. We don't know what our ancestors have done, and we believe what they throw at us, that we're nothing and have never done anything, which history's largest ever lie.
That's right.
Just as the enslavement of our people is history's largest monstrosity. The Jews are trying to tell us that the Holocaust is the worst thing that happened in history. Not a thing, no gusso. What happened to us is by far eons more than the Holocaust. This is not to approve the Holocaust in any way or to deny it, but it's small beer in comparison to what happened to us. And yet we, because of the power of the media, because of our own ignorance, because much of this stuff we've been able to know for something like the last 2 centuries. There have been individual black people who are writing this stuff, and it's there in the books, but we don't bother to learn it because we don't get told that it's there. We don't know that's important, and we listen. Our young people listen to all kinds of stuff. I listened to Michael Jackson. You just played with Michael Jackson, and I didn't understand a word of it. To be absolutely to be absolutely honest, and that's what our young people are listening to, right? And sometimes there's stuff there, but mostly there's next to nothing there. And the places that they could go for real knowledge of us, of our history, of our contribution to humanity, of indeed of our making of humanity, the picking of them don't know because they don't have any way of accessing it.
Yeah. So that's partly why, if you have a stable country, and Biafra would be one of those, it will respect these cultures. It will explain to our people, particularly in the diaspora, what has happened. Would there be accuracy without necessarily banting about, being melodramatic about what's happened to us? There will be events, there'll be lectures, there'll be, if you like, an explanation of who we are. And Biafra, when it was there for 2.5 years, demonstrated 2.5 years.
Oh, the state.
67, 67 to 70 during its war. It demonstrated its ability to innovate when it was totally impossible to innovate. Some Europeans arrived and say, this is the first place we've been to in Africa where the blacks are doing everything. So they were shocked at the amount of what they were able to do. So civilization has been there, but we need to mine it and have stable countries in Africa which will actually show it. So people from abroad will come in and see for themselves. Until we have stable countries, it's going to be difficult to do that.
So return now then to what you were telling us about, which is the making of Nigeria, say in the 19th and 20th century.
So it was therefore a colonial construct in the sense that you had these indigenous cultures embedded prior to the arrival of the Europeans who were scrambling for mineral resources and had to acquire wealth to run their industries. So Nigeria therefore was put together, what we call an agglomeration of divergent cultures. In fact, the person who put them together, Lord Luga, said water and oil can't mix. They know that the type of cultures that were in their different if you like, peoples, although they intermarried, they looked after, they were never at war. They were not industrialized killing of one tribe or the other. They intermarried, they traded. So all these things, but they had their different, distinct identity. Now,
so what did Lugard mean when he talked about water and oil not mixing?
Because he realized from the north, the Muslim way of doing things is different from the... Remember I said to you, they had somebody who could rule and tell them what to do. Whereas in the south, in the east, they have some stubborn people like myself who... If you want to tell them what to do, you have to call a meeting.
But another part of
when you call a meeting, then people sat down and discussed what you're bringing to them to do, whether it's to their advantage or not. So as a result, there were two different people. The British could tell the North what to do, and they do it straight away. They can try and impose it in the East, and it wouldn't work.
Right. I have a question that arises from something that you said earlier, which I know independently, which is that you also said that the Biafran War in effect started because there had been a process by which Biafrans who were everywhere in what was then Nigeria were killed and pushed back into Nigeria.
Pushed out of Nigeria.
No.
Pushed out of Nigeria, back to their part, and then killed to bring back.
Okay. So I think we're agreeing. I might be saying it differently, but in effect what I heard you saying, and I know this to be true, that people from eastern Nigeria were living in the north, they were living in the west. That there came a moment when the place in the north of Nigeria called the Sabangari, it was a district in one of the big cities, where there's an attack on them, and very many thousands were actually killed in that process. So what I'd like you to address briefly is how it came to be the case that those people from the east
Yes.
were living in those numbers in the north.
Absolutely.
Of
It's a
Nigeria.
very, very pertinent question. Now, as I said, the British went there and united water and oil together. So you say to the northern people, we're going to rule you by indirect rule. Yeah? But indirect rule means you have their own way of running their countries and affairs in place. They say, oh, you're a Muslim, yes, but can we bring Christianity to you? Say, no, you can't. We have a Muslim. How about schools? No, Islamic schools. How about, catching up with the modern world? No, we do at our own pace. Down south, what happened? I'm answering your question. Why did you have this problem number?
I'm in agreement with you. I think I understand where you're going.
So down south, Christianity arrived. They say, God sent us. They say, we know God. What's the problem? He sent you. We might actually believe you. God may have sent you. And what is it you can offer us? Oh, okay, schools. So my one village would build a school, and the next one say, this thing is good. We better build ours. So there's a competition. To cut a long story short, down south part of Nigeria.
Don't cut that story short. It's very important.
Okay. Yeah. So the reason I'm going that way is that there was an assimilation of the Western ways of doing things. Because after fighting the British and the British conquered them, they say, what have you got to offer us? Okay. What about churches, schools, and so on? So communities started developing. And what I'm going to say, cut a long story short, because of time, you end up having something like 800.
Sorry, we can come back next week if needed.
You want to explain this properly. You have something like 841 secondary schools, let's say, down in the south. This is pre-independence.
Yes, I know.
Compared to nearly about 42 in the north. But the north is vast. The size of Western Europe. So if you have in the down south, I'm talking both in the Yoruba West and also in the East, a vast amount of secondary schools, but in those days it's quite rare. They were able, therefore, to produce those who can write, who can, therefore, do administration for the British government, which were needed in the north. So, therefore, they went up north to run the trains, the post offices, and all the things. Now, you mentioned the word Sabongari before. For the benefit of the listeners, Sabongari is a place where if you arrive in the north, because you're not a Muslim, they will not allow you to live inside their walled city. You lived outside the walled city because visitors' quarters called Sabongari. Now, Sabongari therefore occupied by those who came from the southern part. And in the Sabongari, they were called privileged pariahs, because they were actually doing the work and getting money from the Europe, in other words, they were earning salaries,
they were
sending their
servants of colonialism in effect.
So they're benefiting, they're having cars, having shops. Meanwhile, the indigenous people were saying, hang on, they've come to our land and they're taking over our jobs. You can imagine where this is going. So they began to restrict them. You're not allowed to own lands. If you do, we'll rescind it. And then so much so that they said, if we don't take any plan to stem this flow, we're going to be swamped. So their premier said,
must be related to Margaret Thatcher.
The jobs, well, he was knighted. So he said the jobs has to be a northerner first. So you have people from the south going to the north to try and run the whole country in the north. And if the northerners who were administering the northern part of Nigeria as a separate entity on behalf of the British via what they call the native administration, they can only appoint you if you're a northerner. So they call it northerner first. So if you have any of theirs who has qualified, he gets the job. If you're then a foreigner, someone, an expat, that's the exact word, an expat, someone from outside Nigeria will get the job number 2, and any other part of Nigeria Yeah, we get 3 before an Igbo person from the east gets the job. Because if things the Igbos, all you have to do is put them in a job, and before you know it, they're taking over. So there was this enmity about those who went off from the southern part to the northern part to help to develop what was then the Nigerian Federation.
Yes.
So
I want to ask another question, because I know that in the making of the Civil War, that's important. The officer class in the Nigerian army was also was also substantially from the south, and particular Igbo. As the place became independent.
Well, I'm building the civilians, and then we bring the army.
All right. Okay.
So the civilians were in, if you like, the most of the people who went up north to set up their own motor, spare part business. They were appeared to be flourishing, and as a result, they attracted more people from their own part, the country. So much so there was an approach when all the killing started, in the tune of between 1.8 to 2 million people outside the eastern part of Nigeria that had to run back to their own part. So there's a huge number, but it's really dwarfs into insignificance when you compare to the population in the north. So, but what was then happening was Nigeria, because of the people in the south who were pushing for independence, the northerners said, no, we're not ready for independence. So there was a mismatch whereby a whole country like Nigeria that could have become independent earlier were being dragged back because people in the north, because of their own way of seeing things or doing things, they weren't training enough people from the northern part who would then administer that part. So they felt they'd be disadvantaged if they had independence earlier. So much so that Nebeokike, where you mentioned
independence means southern rule, just as in the Caribbean, Mr. Bustamante said independence means brown man rule.
There you go. So they didn't want to replace the British colonialism with southern colonialism. Okay, so that was an issue for them in a big time. So the Nigerians were trying to get the British to leave so they can begin this process of African decolonization. So, and there were people like Nebeokike who have Pan-African view. The Pan-African view says
who
that
was he?
So Nebeokike is from the eastern part, is an Igbo person. Now, but he's more Hausa. He was actually born in the north. In 1904. So he was born there, a place called Zenguri. So because his father was a clerk and so on, so he was born up there. And he realized that very, very early that in order for Africans to be emancipated, you have to be well educated to confront
in
the British.
Western way.
In the Western way, to confront the British. So he, along with his friends, stowed away in a ship. They were going to America. They didn't care. So one of his friends became seasick, and they were told that you better throw them overboard, so that otherwise they decided no, they're going to disembark in Accra in Ghana. When they were chucked off the boat. So, and then he started to work as a laborer, and the message got home that to his father and his parents that he ran away. He's now living in Ghana. So then he was brought back, and his father said, here's my pension money, let's do this properly, go to America. So he went to America, he worked as a boxer at the coal mine, trained himself, Lincoln University, got a master's degree in the 30s. Now this is unusual. And at one stage in his quest to help Africa free, he actually was lying before a train line to kill himself. He was fed up with the whole thing. But someone rescued him. He managed to get his head together and went back to Africa. Now, at that time, in the 30s, he has a master's degree. It was very, very strange. So he started by going to media and popularizing the need to free the African mind. So the idea is to restore the dignity of black man. So he was in the forefront.
Was he influenced by Garvey in any way?
Yes, he had Garvey's interest at heart to hold Africa unite together. So the reason why he's significant in this discussion is because he was the one leading, along with others, to try and free Nigeria from British colonialism.
Yeah. By the way, he has an autobiography just called Z.I.K.
Yeah, it's called Zik.
Yeah, that people should find and read.
Excellent. Yeah. Z.I.K. is an abbreviation of Nnamdi Azikiwe. He changed his name from Benjamin to Nnamdi because he wanted to represent his country in an Olympics by himself. Yes. He was a boxer, he's a sprinter, he's a runner, he's a footballer, he's everything. He's a proper athlete. Yes. And they said, no, you can't represent your country. You haven't got a country. So he was so angry. So he decided he's no longer going to be called Benjamin. From now on, his name is Nnamdi. Which is, by the way, the name of the current leader of IPOB, called Nnamdi. So if you like, this is the first Nnamdi. Who gave
number one.
Nnamdi one. So Nnamdi Azikiwe was therefore, along with other members in Nigeria called Awolowo on the west, they were trying to unite.
Who also has an autobiography.
We'll come to that. So they were trying to set the Nigerian people free from colonialism. The problem was the methodology. Because water and oil not make cement, some part of the country weren't ready. The British told the Azikiwe, because he was one of the prime agitators, there are three parts then to Nigeria then, the northern, the eastern and the western at that time. We're talking the 50s. The British told him, if two of you out of three want independence, we will give it to you. So Nigeria could have been independent before Ghana. Nnamdi Azikiwe, having been to America, thinking Pan-African, it says, and one United States of Africa. So if two of us, the East is ready, the West is ready, I'm talking Eastern and Western part of Nigeria then, they called them region in those days.
Yes, they did.
These guys are ready, but the North is not ready. We will wait for them. And the North said, we'll only come and join you guys if you give us 50% of the vote. That's going to be. So they were rigging from the beginning, setting the pace to say, we can only join this independent movement if you give us 50% of the vote. So, and then the remaining 50, of course, is going to be shared between East and West. So you can imagine a federation where preponderantly one side has more majority. So
did they have the population base, or was that a lie?
Now, the population is interesting. If you look at the whole of West Africa, there's only one part in that West African where more people seem to live in the north in Nigeria than in the west. So than in the southern part where it's more populated. And also if you look at population density, it's more on the eastern part, but now using satellite imagery outside the Nile Valley, there are no more greater population density than the eastern part of Nigeria. So they believe that the population census was rigged to give the impression there are more people living in the north than in the south, where there are a huge number of people. So the population...
There's all kinds of problems with that census, isn't it? Because the North, even though it wanted to claim population preponderance, big numeric numbers, they didn't want the women counted. Because they're in.
You can't count.
You're not supposed to.
You can't go inside somebody's house and count the women. It's not done.
So we don't know how they arrived at these numbers at all, because there's all kinds of problems with I remember that.
So they knew the population census was rigged. In fact, when Nigeria became independent, I believe 1962-63, there was another recount, and there was all sorts of figures churned out, so much so that made the Igbos vulnerable, because the person ruling the Igbo part of the eastern part of Nigeria said they didn't believe the census result from the north. His name is Dr. Opara. So he became an enemy of the north, because the north said, we have more population, what's your problem? So they were already fighting, because the reason why they're fighting about population is that the greater your number, the more you share the cake. It's a federal thing. So going back to why the war came, so you therefore have a huge number gone up to the north to help develop Nigeria, but they began to have resentment because their presence in the north, first of all, they're not Muslim. Secondly, they appear to be more, if you like,
enterprising,
and from the other people, they appear to be more aggressive, because they're taking over our jobs, which they are not qualified to do in the first place. But rather than allow them as Nigerians, they wanted other people outside Nigeria to have the job rather than them. So there was, if you look at the answers of the parliamentary debate in the northern part of Nigeria, it's all about how to get rid of the Igbos. This was in the 40s and the 50s.
Okay.
So that was really the genesis of the war we're coming to, because there was an inbuilt discussion about how do we deal with the Igbos. Well, don't give them stores, don't give them land, don't give them, make sure they're not in position of authority. The position of authority in the north was ruled by the northern native authority. So you can't even. So they were able to start plotting and planning how to contain the Igbos who are living in Sabongaris.
Yes.
Yeah. Now you mentioned the military.
Yes.
So the goings on. So Nigeria managed, to get its independence in 1960. I'm not sure if I'm going too quickly.
No, it's all right. It's all
So
right.
Nigeria managed to get its independence in 1960 after the delay and the dragging of the feet from the north.
Yes.
So the Nnamdi Azikiwe and the people who are trying to get Nigeria freed from colonial Britain through boycotting, through basically they used superior argument. There wasn't any fighting or killing like in the Kenya scenario. Nnamdi Azikiwe, with all his knowledge and so on, was able to put together ideas that Nigerians are ready to rule themselves. They have the capacity. In fact, they got everything going for them. They had intellect. They had enough people who were intelligent enough to come to UK and argue their own independence.
Yes.
They were just being held back by a group because they wanted to manipulate them. Anyway, to cut that long story short, it just so happens that when independence was coming, the Britain was in the meanwhile building up the north. Yes, making sure when you hand over this independence, you're giving it to the people who can do business with you.
Yes.
So that mentality is that rather than give it to the people who are able to run the ship, that was Nigeria, we give it to some people who are our friends, who will listen to whatever we say. So the problem with the black man is that you need to be able.
Yeah, but in the beginning you said it was the South. Yeah.
Yes.
That was the friend of the Britons because they accepted schools and religion. Yeah, but now you're saying it's
please repeat that. Repeat that.
I said earlier you're saying that it was the South.
Yes.
That was a friend of the British because they
No,
accepted school and religion.
No, not friends.
Not friends.
Not friends in
They
that sense.
grabbed what the
West had
to offer because it's to their own advantage.
Yes.
So they were the ones who building schools in their own parts, generating enough people who can read to run post office and schools, and therefore they weren't really British friends. This word Boko Haram, I'll touch on it now because it's relevant.
Don't touch. Sorry, go on.
I'll explain why.
I hope you won't touch on that.
I won't touch on it. This book.
No. Can I just?
Please, let me explain why. This thing Boko Haram, which means Western education is forbidden, is coined by when at the earlier stage these people began to show promise. When they read and understand the way the Western world is put together, they became a danger to the West because that's so become education for them is dangerous. You understand? So educating the people from the east and from the west part of Nigeria became something of a challenge to the British authority. So not that they liked them, so the British began to suspect them as if we give this power to them to run the country, this country would take off.
Militant anti-colonialism was based on the leadership from the south. That's the point he's making. Whereas in the north, the entity that they had set up there was run by very generally speaking backward Muslim politicians who were not anti-Western, who were in bed with the West. It's like they set up a neo-colony in the north of Nigeria to help them run the whole of Nigeria. And so in that sense, the leadership in the north were their friends. I think that's what the brothers
That's
say.
right. They played golf with them. They played polo with them and so on. They're really friends of them.
They had horse culture and polo fitted in and all of that. They're very comfortable up there in a way that they weren't in the south.
They don't want to advance the people.
Yeah, that's right.
So the eastern and the western people appear to be more aggressive because in the west they had the first television enterprise in the whole of Africa. They have free education. Which all this therefore became a danger to the colonial master because you can't have these Africans being educated. So what I'm saying, at independence, the Nigerian setting at independence, there were more promise, because of the educated quality in Nigerian compared to other countries outside Nigeria. But what backfired was they were literally held back by the people who rather had the British ruling them than their fellow black people from the southern part being in charge of what was left behind by the British.
Setting up,
So when this dragging of feet was happening, the people who were given the power, therefore, by the British, this is very important, because you're handing independence. They knew independence would come to Africa anyway. Ghana has already become independent. Nigeria is the biggest, most populous part of Africa. Now needs its own independence. And they have a groundswell of knowledge, ability. You can't hold them down forever. So the Brits, being the Brits, know it's inevitable. Why don't we give this power to the people who we can still talk to, who we can still manipulate, who can still, in a way, becomes a flag independence. We give you independence, but we're still running everything remotely from London. That's really the danger. So the people who then saw through all this, because when the paper independence was handed over to the North, they wanted to run things in a way that wasn't progressive enough. So the young military hotheads, this is where they come in and say, why is Nigeria so corrupt? The politicians, we're giving you the opportunity to become independent, but rather than advancing your people, you're running the country to the ground. You have elections, you rig it. People, there's a phrase that says, men became pregnant overnight. You know those agbada we wear in Nigeria, those big gown, they put stuff all your ballot box paper in there, and you go and drop it. So paper were being announced, this is the first post-independent election. The first one, there's an issue that it was rigged, but we move on. They now become independent. Then the first post-independent election, they began to rig elections. This caused a lot of hassle in the western part of Nigeria, which led to what we call Wild West. People were having acid poured on them. They were being killed because they belong to one political organization and not the other. So Awolowo himself was imprisoned. So there's chaos going on within.
And there was a new group called the Action Group.
Yes,
I seem to remember
they weren't new. The Action Group was based in the West. They wanted things to move fast, the free education and so on. So, but their leader called Awolowo was locked up. He was imprisoned. Because of his own views. And his subordinate called Akintola was cozying up to the North because he wanted the West to become partners with the North. The North were already partners of the East, but it wasn't going. The marriage between North and East wasn't going well because they didn't like the census results and everything the East were doing. The North began to suspect them. So there was a cooling off. And the West and the North were trying to form an alliance. And in so doing, there was complete chaos because the Westerners, generality of them, have the more educated. In fact, they started, the education came to them first. They had the premier university, Baden, in the West. So they had people who were highly trained, and they're not going to be pushed around by what So people like
by the backward people from the North.
Well, I won't use the word backward. I think we need to get this right. People who think they're backward, it's just that they're denied the opportunity to go to school. They're Africans like you and I.
Yes, absolutely.
So if you give them the opportunity to go to school, they will not be backward. It's like if you deny them education and then you tell them they're backward, that annoys me. Because open the opportunity for them and you see they will also develop.
I wasn't expressing my own view. I was expressing the view that I think the Westerners took of the North. Of the northern people, and the explanation that you give is, of course, perfectly correct. One other little point. I think it's very important that we. There are two inaccuracies. One is that the Sudan is actually bigger than Nigeria. One, and two, that it became independent before Ghana. Accepting that we don't recognize it because we think of it as an Arab country. But the first black African country to get independence in the post-war period was actually Sudan, 1 year before Nigeria, 1 year before Ghana.
Okay, so Sudan has had its independence, but it was also rigged. It had the Muslim north and the eastern.
And that's why we don't count. South. That's why we don't count it, because we regard it as Arab. In fact, it's not Arab at all. It's black people, either mixed race black people in the north who call themselves Arab, and Africans like you and me, not mixed at all in the south. But they're always there. and so it get called Arab, but not apart from the language in the north, there's nothing Arabic about it.
Yeah. So when the first wave of independence started, Sudan, then Ghana, there were people who were Pan-Africanists, like Kwame Nkrumah. Sorry, your famous name, Kwame. Nkrumah. He wanted the whole Africa to be one country, one army. Well, in fact, he married an Egyptian. Right, so people like Kwame Nkrumah, who was under the tutelage of Nnamdi Azikiwe, Azikiwe helped, and so on. So all these people like Julius Nyerere, Jomo Kenyatta, all these guys, Zambian guy Kenneth Kaunda, they're all Pan-Africanists. But what was then happening in Nigeria, especially after the Congo uprising, the Congo scenario, because Patrice Lumumba, they tried to divide the country and so on. The Nigerian soldiers, the officers, went there and tried to help a part of the UN delegation to try and stem the what was going on. So when they returned, they said to themselves, "We can't have Nigeria, mess up. We South Africa is going to need us, and other African countries," which Kwame Nkrumah said, Ghana is free today, but it's not free really until the whole of Africa is free. So that sort of thinking was in the mindset of the earlier leaders. What then happened was the young hotheads, if you call them hotheads, the officer class, the young officer class, because the senior officers were part of the establishment. They're not going to do any coup. The young officers who are being outside Nigeria, are looking at surveying what's happening in Africa. We need to move forward, guys. What's happening here? So they decided the way Nigeria was going, with all the turmoil going in the West I mentioned earlier, and all the instability built into the Nigerian independence, and also forever in perpetuity, the northern nobody else is ever going to rule Nigeria except from the north.
Because they have the numbers.
They had the numbers.
Allegedly.
I said they make us believe. They had the numbers, and they had everything that was in Nigeria was sited in North. So people had to go up there to do their factories and work and so on. So following, if you like, Nigeria sliding into corrupt, failed politicians. So I mentioned those important politicians earlier on. They had a different vision. But the actual people running the new independent country became corrupt. That we're saying, what's going on here? We're supposed to be independent, but you're dragging us backwards. So they became ostentatious, they're flaunting their money and so on. So the military stepped in and said, enough is enough. They plotted.
That's the first coup.
They did. I think there were other coups in, is it Mali or Chad or something?
No, just in Nigeria.
So the first Nigerian coup, 1966, January. So they set up a scenario whereby they wanted to get rid of the politicians. So unfortunately they killed the prime minister, who of course from the north,
Sir Tafawa Balewa.
Tafawa Balewa. Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa. He was from the north. They killed,
and he's the emir, so he's not only the political leader, but he's in a way the religious leader of the north.
Well, let me explain that. There are two people. One is the Tafawa Balewa, who is the prime minister of Nigeria. He's not the Muslim guy. The Muslim guy is called Sadwana of Sokoto, who's Bello. Bello was the guy. So Bello is like the spiritual leader. Ahmadu Bello. He's the one who says, if you got a job, it's the northern first. So he was in a way running the whole country by proxy, as it were. So the military killed him, which is, if you like a big headache. So the military, young hotheads, they killed him. They killed the prime minister. They killed, I think, a senior northern soldier. And then they killed the finance minister, someone who's from the west. No, he's from Ukachi-Lois, I think, is from the Midwest. They killed Akintola, who's from the west. But the person from the east, called Opara, was not killed. And they say, hang on, wait, what's going on here? You killed all the other people, and you didn't kill the guy from the east. The guy from the east said he heard there was going to be a coup, according to the story,
ran away.
And he ran away because Archbishop Macarius was visiting him. Macarius is a visiting dignitary
from
Greece,
Cyprus. From Cyprus,
so
yes.
it's Cypriot Greek, Greek Cypriot. So he was visiting his part of Nigeria. So opera went and ran into where he was staying. So if the military were coming after him, they had to create an international scene. So the military surrounded him, but because the coup failed, those military who were surrounding the Archbishop Macarius were told to stand down. So they didn't kill him or the Eastern Premier.
Yeah.
So the story then filtered in that the coup was stopped in the Lagos by the military officer senior to the junior officers. His name, of course, is Ukachi-Lois. He happened to be from the east. A guy called Ojukwu was also in the north, and he managed to contain the coup over there. And they negotiated with coup plotters to allow Nigerian military to take over the temporary running of the country, because now the civilians, elected civilians, are now being, most of them killed, apart from the Eastern Premier. So what then emerged was a coup which was designed to try and make Nigeria stable. Remember, the West was unstable.
Yeah.
The elections were no longer credible. Wole Soyinka, in fact, he went and he put a mask on and tried to say that the coup, put a mask on to say that elections were fraud. He went to a radio broadcast like this and said this nonsense about having an election which was rigged was not acceptable to the West. So that led to a real turmoil which the military stepped in to try and calm. When the coup occurred, the whole country breathed a huge sigh of relief and said, wow, we now got a country. And all the corrupt politicians started hiding. Some of them started declaring how much they've stolen. The North was celebrating, the East was celebrating, the West celebrated, say, at last, we now have a country. But the problem then was the British, it's not the way it was designed. You can't have somebody from the East running the country because it's no longer the plan. So it was the British BBC that first said, this is now beginning to look like an Igbo coup. Now, so that's an incendiary thing to say. For anyone who's in the broadcasting, if you say it's now beginning to look like an Igbo coup, some people latched onto it. Because if it's now an Igbo coup, and Igbos are already becoming what we call privileged pariah in the north, you can see the signal begin to build up to get rid of the Igbos, because they've now taken over our jobs and are now ruling us instead of Abuba Tafa Belewa. You can understand where this was going. So before, as a result of that coup, there was a planned counter coup. And in order to run the country, before we come to plan counter coup, in order to run the country, the person who found himself at the head of state was the head of the military, who happened to have gone to Congo as a UN delegate and so on. So he was now ruling Nigeria as
What's
a
his
military.
name?
Ukachi-Lois, Major General Ukachi-Lois. So he is now ruling Nigeria as a military, and each region he appointed military officers to administer the regions, because the civilians are now waiting to what to do, hand power back. For that to happen, he made decrees and said, this is the rule we're going to run this by, unify the country. You can't unify a country which is all federal. And the people in the north say, no, we don't want to join. What's going on? We don't want to be part of the country. We are a northern federate state federation. You have your western federation, you have the eastern. So there was an issue now about how do we force people in Nigeria to work as one. So the decree was 34. They used this as an excuse, as it's actually what Nigeria is running now. Nigeria is still a unitary country. It's still a unitary state run from the center. This guy was advocating running it from the center. They rebelled against him and did a counter coup. This counter coup got rid of all the Igbo officers in one night, and then the military with the civilians descended on the Igbo population in the north and started the killing. So this killing started in the killing started around May 66, and so much so, but May 29, 66, July 29, 66, and September 29, 66, systematic dates. lots and lots of people were killed, ranging between 30 to 50,000, and 2 million returned back to the eastern part.
Yes.
So that's really the beginning of the war. Because when you kill that number of people, we're not just talking about communal killing. You descend anyone who is Igbo in the north, you kill them. Some were running in the train. Some of the people who managed to get into the train were beheaded and the body dumped in the train. Pregnant women had their abdomen ripped up, children killed. So what was happening in 1966 was something totally phenomenally different that the African have ever experienced, because like your brother, we're neighbors, and now I'm being killed. So I run away with everything I ever possessed back to if I escaped, I managed to return back to my village. So they have returned to their village now. So by the end of 1966, there was nowhere in Nigeria, in the north, even the killing went to the Lagos, the capital. So Chinua Achebe has to escape from Lagos for his life. Someone was trying to put the theory, his sword mightier than the pen. It's not actually as funny as it sounds. So he has to, first of all, save his life before he argued whether when they come to shoot him, whether his pen is going to fight against them anyway. So Chinua Achebe escaped from and was so disappointed that even in his own capital, he's not safe. Do
our listeners know who Chinua Achebe was?
Well, Chinua Achebe, as you know, is the person who wrote one of the most striking book in African literature about 60 years ago, 1958, when he first published what we call Things Fall Apart. And it's worth reading. So it's the first time an African was reading a book about Africans and how their culture and so on was set up. So when he wrote it, the teacher said, well, this book doesn't have any form. He said, what is form? Like everything good you decide, they always try to talk you down. So he published it, the manuscript, was typed it and sent it to London. And he sat in somebody's office for months and months, and he didn't have a copy. There's no photocopy in 58. And if he has lost that manuscript, there's no way we'll know about Things Fall Apart. So he was appointed to BBC equivalent in Nigeria Broadcasting Service. So when the head of that, who was a white woman, was coming to London, he begged her to go to these publishers, please go and rescue my manuscript.
What's happening there.
So she returned, stormed into the office and said, what's happened to the manuscript? He said, what manuscript? So eventually said, if you don't do anything in the manuscript, I'm going to sue you, blah, blah, blah. And they quickly printed it. That's why we have Things Fall Apart today. So Chinua Achebe is celebrated author.
His next book is called Man of the People or something, which actually tries to deal with that contemporary situation in Nigeria.
So it's almost prophetic in the sense that if you read his books, it's that it's cataloging what's happening in Nigeria. Because of those books, they say, the Igbos plotted the coup all along. Because it's so reflective of what's happening in Nigeria. But alas, late Professor Chinua Achebe, he was one of the Biafran ambassadors during the war to explain what's going on. So, where were we? We got to the stage
we're now at the Civil War.
Yeah, so the Civil War then came as a result of all the killings outside the eastern part of Nigeria. They weren't just killing Igbos, they were killing people with Bibio, people from Efik, all the tribes that make up the eastern Nigeria. People. So all the people that make up eastern Nigeria were being killed. So they returned back to their ancestral land. As I said, trains were returning with people missing limbs, beheading. So although the trains had some people who survived, they have horrible stories to tell of what happened to them. So their relatives saw this and they were completely flabbergasted. What can we do? How do we then stay in this country called Nigeria? Because the plan was to get rid of the Igbos. The Yorubas, get rid of the Igbos. And some of my Yoruba friends would say, well, what am I talking about? When the Nigerian soldiers in Yoruba land went from door to door, they were knocking on doors. And when they used the word toro used to be a tuppence, When you say toro, the way you speak it, your accent will give away whether you are Yoruba or Igbo. And you got killed. The doors were daubed So Brother. So they know where the Igbos lived and so in Lagos. So for the outsiders, say, well, how can you know who's Igbo and who's... You all look alike. Some of us have tribal markings. That's another issue. But the way we had shops and the way they behaved, they can tell who's Igbo. So anyway, cut a long story short again, the Igbos were killed outside their own tribal zone, their own tribal land. When they returned part, they didn't know what it is they ought to do. There was a lot of anger in the eastern part of Nigeria. We now need to find a solution. The solution was, if we stay as we are, that's fine. There's no problem. The Nigerian will tell us what to do. The rest of the Nigeria will tell us what they don't want us to do. Do we go back and get killed again? Remember, the 66, although there are three waves of killing, the Igbos have been killed, or the Easterners have been killed in Nigeria, in northern Nigeria, in 1945. They've been killed in 1953. So this killing, the third time it's happened, the Biafrans or the Igbos or the Easterners felt enough was enough.
What prompted those earlier killings, which I wasn't aware of? The 45 and whatever.
Yeah. The 45 was around the war. There was a sort of strike around Jos area, the tin mines. So because the Igbos were leading the boycotting, the British thought it'd be a good idea just to let them suffer a bit. So we were massacred as a result of that.
So the British
were in charge then.
British instituted massacre. Okay.
So not only
and
that,
on the second occasion?
The second occasion in 53 was about, we want independence from Nigeria, but the North said we're not ready. And at the reception we had in Ibadan, which is the western part of Nigeria, insulted our delegates. So when they got back to the North, they turned on the Igbos and killed them. So and the British investigated the killing and said, the reason for this killing is still in the ground and it may happen again. And nobody did anything about it. So the Igbos, therefore, the Biafrans, therefore, have a history of what has been happening to them over these years.
Thanks for that.
So it was therefore this killing in 66 that literally broke the camel's back. Now, they decided, what do we do? Let's talk constitutional reform then to see how we can live together. And then it drifted into coming back to Ghana, a place called Aburi, where the representative from the eastern part of Nigeria, the western part, the northern part, the midwestern then, and Lagos, they all got together, they sat down with the new military governor. They've killed the Igbo head of state, now Gowon is in charge. So they went to Ghana to say, how do we live together as citizens of one country? The conclusion was that, those people we chased out of Nigeria, those who are government employed, we need to pay them their salaries. They left in May, June, July. They haven't had any salary since January now. They're starving. We need to somehow help them. So the second, so one is therefore looking after those who have been displaced. There were 2 million, because the eastern region's government cannot cope with that sort of deluge of refugees. But the other thing that sustained them was this African way of doing things. Their own people, everyone have a village to go to, a relative, so they absorb them. The extended family system was what saved those 2 million people. Unlike the current Rohingya, it's exactly the same thing. Rohingya were being chased out from Burma. They would go back. The UN need to step in and feed them. But in the Biafran scenario, over 2 million people were absorbed by the Easterners. Nobody stepped in to do anything. So they were nursing that wound. They're now asking Nigeria, how do we live together? So they went to Ghana, Aburi, Ghana, to try and find out the way to work out something. So it was decided the best thing is to have those 4 regions stay where they are and move apart slightly. They call confederation. So any decision has to be made by these 4 people leading the regions, and it's got to have concurrence. We've got to agree to it. And by the way, we're not going to use force to settle Nigerian crisis anymore. We're not going to kill each other anymore. Let's put force aside. They all signed this communique. Ankara, who was the general ruling Ghana at the time, by that time Nkrumah has been deposed. So Ankara was the one who chaired this meeting. The Nigerian delegation said, all right, why don't we put this communique to the African Union equivalent, which was the OAU. So that they have a copy of
63.
so that we have a copy of this discussion. They said, no, it's an internal matter. We are Nigerians. We can deal with this problem. So let's keep it to ourselves. But we have a written agreement which we both signed, and so on. So they went away from Ghana very, very pleased that the Africans, for the first time, were sat down, were able to resolve all their issues and decide the way going forward. But all the agreements were made. Within a few days of returning from Aburi, the Nigerian side started saying, no, we did not agree to this. As you could say, hang on. The head of state, the head of Eastern Pass, said, hang on, we had this on gramophone record. It's all recorded. Here's the sheet. Your secretary signed it. My secretary signed. They were actually eating from the same spoon, the same plate. And if you look at the pictures of Aburi, they all agreed. It was amicably settled. But then Nigeria decided to start pulling away, from the agreement. Start
the
changing.
government of Nigeria.
The government of Nigeria then started trying to go back, and we believe they may have been influenced by the Western input when they now read the script of how these Africans can live together. So the Western, in my opinion, can never run their country unless you have conflict in Africa, because that fuels their while you're busy killing each other, they cart away your goods, isn't it? And they give you weapons to kill each other. So it helps them. So if Aburi was allowed, there would have been no Biafra war. There would have been, in fact, no mention of Biafra as a country. So the Nigeria would have remained the same. And when the wound of all the killings, when that has settled, it's possible Nigeria could have remained one country. But because Aburi was reneged, they did not carry out the decision, because it's like the final straw. It was like, we have been killed numerous occasions, and we now want somehow to forge a way of going forward. But you ignored all the decisions we made. You ignored everything, and you then put inside this communique, we can declare a state of emergency at any time. So the Easterners were scratching their head, but Ojukwu, you went and so they wrote a shirt, on Aburi we stand. Yeah, it's like the last straw. On Aburi we stand. So because that was reneged on, Biafran said, look, because that was so on the the accord was signed in January, 4th and 5th of January 1967. So Ojukwu said to the people, we just have to wait for Gowon to come to us and agree with what we said. So Gowon started changing.
You haven't told the listeners who Ojukwu was.
Sorry. Ojukwu was the, Emeka Ojukwu was the person who was appointed after the coup, the first coup, which got rid of the Nigerian politicians in what they call the First Republic. He was appointed to administer the Eastern region.
And he's a soldier in the then Nigerian army.
Yes, he was a Nigerian soldier, first Oxford trained, first Oxford graduate Nigerian military.
Yeah, general.
So general. So he wasn't a general then; he was a lieutenant colonel.
All right.
When he was ruling, so he was appointed to administer Eastern Nigeria. Okay, just as somebody else called Ejo was appointed to administer Western Nigeria, Adebayo was appointed to administer Western Nigeria, and Katsina was appointed to look after Northern Nigeria. And then you had the overall supreme commander called Agi Ironsi. So when Agi Ironsi was removed, Gowon stepped into his place. When they went to Aburi, they didn't even know where Agi Ironsi was. They haven't accepted that he was dead. So Ojukwu said, well, first we have to decide that he's dead, he's not dead. So therefore, we cannot we cannot recognize Gowon as the supreme head until we decided. So it was in Aburi that they declared that the Supreme Commander has died. And the Ojukwu said, okay, if that's the case, we lower the flag as military and move on. The king is dead, long live the king, and so on. So that concept was put in place. So Gowon was going to be recognized as the overall head of the Nigerian. But he reneged, even though he's junior to Ojukwu and he's junior to other people, like Adebayo from the West. So strictly speaking, there was an indisciplined Nigerian army. Because the next person after Major General Gowon, after General Agi Ironsi was killed, it should have been a Yoruba person who stepped into the breach to be the Nigerian army, called Ogundipe. But he was not allowed to be the head of Nigerian military because the Northerners didn't like the idea of anybody else ruling the country other than they've got to come from the north.
Yeah.
So that indiscipline was discussed in Aburi. And he said, we are building in something strange to the military, indiscipline. And that means a captain can be replaced by a sergeant can be replaced by corporal, and so on. You know, all the coups that we had in Africa ended up coming down to the corporal. So anyway, all that was attempted to arrest it. So on Aburi we stand was really a way of drawing a line on the sand to stabilize what was really, really unstable. Now, when Aburi wasn't ratified, or they weren't acting on
the Nigerian
government started going back on it. Ojukwu said, well, when the next financial year, which starts in April, if it's not ratified, he will have to start collecting tax from the eastern part and use that money to feed and administer the country. Remember, people are run back from the northern part. Schools are now expanded. Hospitals need to be maintained. Basically, if the East didn't collect the money to pay, because he collected money and handed it over to the federal, so he said, I'm now going to collect this money and use it to administer the eastern region. Gowon said, you can't do that. It's against the way we would normally run things. But he would not pay the Gowon is still alive, by the way. So, an eastern region, the money was due to them, I believe, by 11 or 10 million, was denied them. So, Ojukwu was trying to find a way to run this part of the eastern Nigeria, which Nigeria wasn't looking after those who have ran from the other part of Nigeria. So Ojukwu announced in advance, it's not that he started taking it. So that Gowon said, if you do that, there'll be a blockade. They started stopping any export leaving the east. So they put a blockade even before the war started. So around April, there's a blockade already imposed on the eastern part of Nigeria. And so that began to bite in to these people who are trying to make a living out of nothing. So when that imposition, then the Ojukwu said, well, if you're going to kill somebody, you can either shoot them in the head, you can either shoot them with a bullet, or you starve them to death. So this was in fact, it's interesting. It's almost prophetic, because starvation was used as a weapon during the war. Because if you put a blockade, so people cannot export or bring things in, then you're in a way going to starve them. So Ojukwu warned that if you put a blockade,
that was one of the tragedies of that war, wasn't there? I remember the starvation and
but
emaciated people.
Indeed. So what I was saying, that starvation began by blockading the eastern part even before the war started. So Gowon blockaded that part, even though the war hasn't started, to stop Ojukwu trading and helping to build that area. Now, so because of that, Ojukwu then talked to all the eastern leaders or elders and say, here is our situation. Do we leave Nigeria? Do we stay in Nigeria or what? So all the various communities in the eastern part of Nigeria, the traders, the teachers, all the association got together and councils of chiefs and elders. And they said to Ojukwu, we want you to pull us out of Nigeria. We are tired. Okay.
And what was their plan for dealing with the blockade?
Right. So they have not, they said, if we stay as we are, we can't go back to Nigeria. And Nigeria wants us to stay in Nigeria, but they're not going to support the people who are suffering. So we want to be an independent country, and hoping outsiders will look into our problem and help us so that we survive. So Ojukwu says it's going to be a rough ride. They say, well, we are mandating you. So if you look at the communique, they say, Ojukwu, we're not giving you the chance to think about it. We are mandating you to declare eastern part of Nigeria a sovereign state called Biafra. So he declared that on the 30th of May, and that is where we are here today. 1967. So they killed them in 66. It took a while trying to find a way out. Amazing amount of, if you like, patience. But when that failed, they declared themselves as an independent country. And within 6 weeks, Nigeria marched over and said, this will be over in a week or so. We're going to finish you off.
Yes.
So they held that for nearly 2.5 years.
They had a slogan, didn't they? To keep Nigeria one is a task that must be done.
Yes, everybody says that, but the actual original phrase was to keep Nigeria one is an attack that must be done. That's got one zone, but they changed it to that must
that's
be
not the
a task.
That's not the version of it that I've seen.
That's the version. Everybody tells about it's a task that must be done, but it's actually an attack that must be done.
Okay.
Because the mentality was, we're going to teach the Igbos a lesson.
Okay.
We're going to attack them and get back. And if you like, the hate speeches was then announced in the radio, go and finish the job of 66. All the killing, we're going to finish it off. We're therefore going to invade the East and finish off the Igbos. But the Igbos have nowhere to run to. So they defend themselves, and that's really why the war was so bitter, and the consequence of it is still where we are now. Okay, so that's background.
All right. So, but at the point at which the Independence Declaration was made, there was already a blockade in place.
Yes,
that was quite likely to lead to the starvation that we eventually saw.
Correct.
What was the plan for getting around that?
Right. There was no. How can I? In fact, as a child, I realized things like salt was becoming scarce even before the war started.
Yes. Because the blockade started.
The blockade already started before the war. Not many people know about that. So if you blockade, and the reason why they blockaded so that prevented any weapons getting to the east. All the weaponry, all the soldiery was done in the north. So it was an easy prey. So, just go over there, 48 hours, 72 hours, we're weak and we wipe out this and round up all the Ojukwu supporters and bring these guys back to Nigeria. That was the thought. So the blockade was in place. Cameroon was a border in the eastern part of then Biafra. So they was actually sealed off. You weren't flying out, you weren't flying in. So the blockade began before the war. And the Biafran therefore tried to find a way to run that blockade. And the only way out was to fly in under attack and so on.
Who was Ojukwu's deputy?
Ojukwu's deputy is called General Effiong. He's not Igbo, he's from Ibibio, Efik extraction. So it's like this person I mentioned earlier about United States of Biafra.
Before him, was there somebody called Chudesekwe? Ever heard of him? Chuedisokei or Koi. Chudesoke. No? It's okay.
No.
I won't tell the story then. Because he did have a deputy Ojukwu of that name.
Yes.
Who was killed during the war.
Yeah. Secretary one of these officers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But I have a romantic story about him because I know his son. The story goes like this.
Yes.
Before he went back to Nigeria, when he was studying here, it may have been at Sandhurst or somewhere.
Yes.
He and a friend, nothing turns on this story, he and a friend are on this train. Also in the train, in the same compartment, were two Caribbean women.
Okay.
They're nurses, and they're going to Bristol.
Okay.
Right. And Chudesekwe falls in love at first sight with one of these with one of these sisters.
As you do.
He picks up who she is from listening to the conversation and where she's living from listening to the conversation.
Okay.
And then he presents himself on her doorstep in Bristol.
Okay.
And eventually proposes, and they get married.
Right.
And she goes back to Biafra. It eventually becomes Biafra, and lives with him. He dies during the war, and the wife, they have a child. The child is my friend, who's called Louis Chudesekwe. He's an academic in the States.
Spell this for me. It might help.
I think it's CHU.
Yes.
DIE. SOKIE. It's. I'm going from memory, and it's along those lines. And he was definitely the father, the man I'm talking about.
Yes.
Definitely one of Ojukwu's deputies during the war, and was killed during the war. Right. So the mother eventually comes. Actually, there's another bit of the story.
Yes.
The general's brother says, my brother has died. I want you to become my wife.
Right.
And one member of the family says, no, she's not one of our women. You know, if she was one of us, that'd be your responsibility.
Tradition, yes.
Yeah, but she's not one of us. So, she did come back to England. Then she migrated to the States and became quite a senior nurse, because that's what she was.
Right.
And her son, who I repeat is my friend, went to university in the States and is now, as I say, an academic. But it's kind of a romantic story how they fall in love at first sight. Yeah. And
so he's obviously a very important guy, but he's not mentioned in most of the things I've read.
Yeah, but he's definitely a real figure.
Yeah.
Anyway, see if you can find that name.
Yes. Yes. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So another part of the story is because the oil is in the east.
Yes.
And you don't touch on that.
Yeah. I deliberately left it out.
All right. Put that
now
in.
I can bring it in.
Put that
now.
in for us and the listeners.
Right. Yeah. Now, Biafra is a land literally not flowing milk and honey, but literally sitting on an oil, and indeed the British found out that the amount of oil they discovered is more than what they had in Kuwait.
Yes.
Now, in the context of the oil in the 60s, is very, very significant because there's an Israeli 6-day war which preceded the 67. Israeli Arab conflict was in 67. Biafra was just declared after. Now, following the Israeli war, the Suez Canal was shut down. So you could not bring oil straight through Suez Canal. It was harder to import oil from the Middle East. Middle Easterns were not happy to sell oil to the West as a punishment for Israel. Britain, therefore, can only rely on Biafran oil. The North Sea oil was not around then.
Not yet.
So this was so critical for British economy, the Biafran oil. And BP Shell was part of the company, as well as others, who were prospecting in the eastern part of Nigeria where they discovered oil. Not just oil, this is Bonny Light. Bonny Light meaning that is one of the few you can actually bring the diesel, bring it and run in a diesel car. It's almost sulfur-free.
Very high quality.
High quality oil, sulfur-free. So it was a precious commodity. Now, when the shooting war started, the British wanted to know who's going to control the oil fields. That's another story. Who is going to control the oil fields? Ojukwu was in the east where the oil was actually sitting. If he overran the part where all the oil fields are, British would have supported him. Ojukwu wanted them to recognize his people are starving and want the Shell to pay some money, royalties, instead of paying it to the north, to the Nigerian government. This was part of the argument after Aburi. Who do you pay money? Why not pay it into those who are suffering? So they said Ojukwu can make a deal with the Shell. That annoyed the Nigerians. So you can't make a deal with them because this money belongs to... But the oil was being dug out from the Igbo land. Now, some people say, no, it's Bonny. It's on the coastal part. No, the oil was discovered. There are Nigerian-owned papers say that there are more oil drilled from the Aba, which is right in the Igbo center, Igbo land, compared to the bits discovered from the coastal zone. So they knew there was oil in the eastern part anyway. So there's enough oil and now there's gas. The problem is that the oil and gas, which should have been a blessing, is now made Nigerians lazy because that's the only thing they rely on. So the oil was a major factor during the war because the West wanted to make sure the oil flowed to the West. Right, and not interrupted. So they went for a quick kill policy. The sooner you liberate and stop the war, the more the oil will start flowing. So, and that was really the major issue. So
two little points. One, nothing turns on. You know this thing about the quality of the oil that comes from the region we're talking about?
Yes.
Occasionally, oil is discovered of such pure quality that even the oil companies don't believe. That happened in Trinidad.
Right.
In the early part of the 20th century, oil was discovered in Trinidad. They sent back a bottle, anyway, a container of this stuff to the UK to be tested. And the people up here said, this is fake. oil doesn't arise naturally of that purity. And because of that, the oil fields in Trinidad were actually developed later than they could otherwise have been, because
they couldn't believe it.
The people didn't believe that oil appears in such quality naturally. So that's a small point. Nothing turns on
that's
that.
Useful to know.
But Nigeria now, much of the gas is flared off, isn't it? It's not actually exported at all. It's just burnt off, and it's the way it's been harvested, if you will, mined, pulled out, has been an ecological disaster, isn't it? How is Biafra intending to manage that differently from the way Nigeria has managed it?
Indeed. So it's like you give me a broom to sweep my room. I will sweep it better than somebody else because it belongs to me.
Yes, I like the image.
So there's a need then, because of the ecological disaster. You mentioned Ogoni to start with.
Yes.
The oil spill around where there's water, people actually fished. Before the oil, it's like we discovered River Ogoni. There are people who've been bathing and sleeping and swimming in it before you discovered it. So their livelihood before oil was fishing.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
So now, if you've gone and polluted the waters in which they fish and drink from, it makes it ecological disaster for them.
Absolutely.
I think it was Shell who's recently apologized for the way they vandalized the land.
They need to do more than apologize. It's a real disaster.
I totally agree with you. So when there's an oil spill, there's no urgency like in the Exxon disaster in America,
where in the Gulf of Mexico.
Indeed, where they sued them and they cleaned it up. In Nigeria, just mess it up and leave it, because the place where you're digging it from, if they raise their head to talk about it, like Sarawiwo, you killed them, and nobody cared. And you mentioned gas flaring. That is true. Part of the oil exploring, that the gas that come out, instead of containing it and piping it to somewhere, they flare. The flaring meaning you set it alight and it's burning. So if you imagine you live in a village near where this is flaring, it's a 24/7 noise for one, and the area is polluted. You go in, your clothing is all sootified because of all the soot that are coming, and the thing you're breathing can't be healthy for you. So that needs to be cleared, and the people who would do the clearing will be those who own that land, given the right incentives, because Nigeria, for the past 50 years, in fact, oil was discovered in 57 or so, they haven't done anything about it. And it's like, there is not our problem. So it's sad, because this is happening, it's causing genetic changes and illnesses and so on. And it can only be addressed by the owners.
So the Biafra policy is that with us in charge,
we'll clean it better.
These ecological issues will be properly handled.
Absolutely.
And they clearly have not been by
they
either
and will not be.
By either Royal Dutch Shell or the Nigerian government.
Nigerian can't put pressure on Dutch oil, because Dutch oil rely. They're in the cahoots. They're in the same. They're bedfellows, and it's like, I want you to clean something, but I'm paying you to keep quiet about it.
So, how does Biafra see itself in the future, as an oil state, or how is it going to get its large revenue from?
Okay, it's very interesting, because the oil, we're not seeing it now. The Biafrans haven't seen the oil to the advantage. It's not been, the oil money is being used to develop the rest of Nigeria. And the interesting thing was, there was a war in that part where the oil is manufactured. There was a devastating war. It's like you had modern weaponry used and discharged and blown up the place. So the rehabilitation, reconstruction hasn't actually started in Lagos, where they did the Festac,
Yes, I remember Festac.
You remember Festac. So you're a cultured man.
77.
You're a cultured man, sir. So they
we do our best.
So they did it to develop the other part of Nigeria, the northern part of Nigeria, so the oil is not actually trickling to the owners of the land. So the Biafrans have been relying on their own self-help, their own ingenuity, those in the diaspora, and so on. So when Biafra comes, not only will he clean the oil, we are willing to sell the oil to develop. In fact, I think there's a plan, if necessary, to actually share the oil with the rest of Nigeria if they have a discussion. This is not. This is probably my impression, my understanding of it. To share the oil with the rest of Nigeria, so there'll be peace. Because you need to sell this oil.
It's being forcibly shared at the moment anyway.
It's not being shared. I'll tell you what's happening. It gives the impression it's being shared. The money goes to Nigerian purse. For what is left is then trickled down to the areas.
Leave aside the bit that was stolen and banked here.
You sprinkle it. There are more out in foreign banks. You just sprinkle it to the communities. They don't have drinking water. They don't have bridges to link to community. They don't have electricity. Health is non-existent. Roads, well, forget about it. So the seaport in that area is not developed. Now, so there's nothing that we're not benefiting from the oil. So if Biafra comes and there's some of the oil left behind, we might use it to develop, clean up the place. But the ingenuity of the people is what we're going to rely on.
Does anybody have any idea about how much of the oil is left? Because oil isn't infinite anyway.
It will run out.
And North Sea oil now is in trouble. Because the repeat is not infinite. Does anybody have any idea about how much of the stock is left?
I personally don't know, and so I can't really make a comment on that. But the interesting thing is that during the war, the people who have the oil didn't declare that they had more oil. They didn't declare to both the Biafrans or the Nigerians that there are actually more oil than they registered.
Kuwait you mentioned.
Yes, they didn't tell us there are more oil in the Biafran land than they actually wrote on the paper. So they knew there are more. But that is on the land. Now offshore there are more oil. But the oil scenario is that if there was no oil at all in Biafra land, we'd not be having this conversation. They'll say, good riddance. After killing us, they say, but it's fact that you had oil. That's why I didn't talk about it earlier on. Because they have oil, that is why they want you to now come back. To come back to maintain the territorial integrity, haven't killed you in the first place to kick you out. Now they want to kill you to bring you back in so that they have access to the oil. So the oil does have a part to play.
Yes, I see that. Incidentally, in many of our countries, and back to Trinidad, very important place for oil. The Trinidad government didn't know how much oil and gas is there, nor did they ever know how much is being taken out. Things may have changed, but that's how disastrous our neo-colonies are. We don't have any real even sense of the scale of the resources that are ours, nor of the rate of extraction, nor of the amount
it is said a tanker will park in the Nigerian ports and they just fill it up and off they go.
And nobody knows. They don't even bother to count how many ships. Yes. I wonder if there are any callers, because thanks, my brother. It's been a very informative and exciting, certainly to me. I'm old enough to remember a great deal of this stuff. So I just wonder if there are any callers who might wish to explore what has been said.
And I've got a saying, there's three sides to a coin,
Yes, I haven't heard that one, sir.
Okay, well, you have the ends,
you
have the tail,
and
you have the round. Right? So the end and the tail will have its own truth, and the round side is the truth of both sides.
Okay, it's like how many sides has an egg got? And they said an egg has two sides, the outside and the inside.
All right. Someone on the text said that I didn't introduce you, which is not true. They probably wasn't listening from the start. But anyway, let me read out the numbers for people to ring before you introduce yourself again. Okay, the number is 0207 193 0174. That's 0207 193 0174. So if you could introduce yourself again to those who did not hear.
Yes, my name is Justice Ukachi-Lois. I'm in the medical profession, but I'm also happen to be the UK, United Kingdom, National Coordinator for the indigenous people of Biafra.
When you say you're in the medical profession, does that mean you're a doctor or something? Do you do something else in medicine?
I'm a surgeon. I'm an
Okay,
orthopedic
all right,
surgeon.
good. Yes, that's why you're not. That's why you're Mister rather than Doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. We like to call ourselves misters.
Okay, yeah.
So you cut up people, do you?
Well, we'll put them back together, sir. Put them back together. He's already cut up by trauma. Well, I'm not. It's not about me. It's about Biafra.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But we like to know who we're dealing with, and I'm sure the listeners do too.
Yes.
I think people are a bit slow off the draw there.
Yeah.
I think it's 3909. You was ringing quite profusely at the beginning. And now is a chance to ring back. All right. Not on the
ringing on the wrong line.
You know what I'm saying? It's 0207-193-0174. That's the number to ring on. All right. So, what were the kind of religion in the entity called Nigeria today before the European came?
Yes. The eastern part, which I'm from, is more Judeo-Christian religion. I say that because it's more like...
Before the white man came?
Yes. They had, if you looked at Ekwano Olauda writing, he's a young Biafran, if I can use the term now, slave who freed himself and played a part in abolition of slavery. Yeah. He wrote a book about his part of the Africa, where he said, literally, they practiced Leviticus teaching about rituals, cleanings, and so on. Yes. So it's more Jewish. I know some people don't want to hear that than what we were led to believe. Remember what I said earlier? When the Christians arrived and said, God sent us, they knew who God was. And therefore, it's easier for them to accept Christianity. So they were, that's why I use the term Judeo-Christian values. That's on the eastern part. And it's the only part in the whole West Africa which has not been Islamized. So in the northern part of Islam, in the western part, Islam is half and half Christian. So those are, but I can also use the word indigenous religion. They practice their forefathers' beliefs or whatever. So there's always
But why, in all honesty, do you call that Judeo-Christian? I mean, I know that, I can see that. It's a long time since I've read Equiano. And I can see, but we're talking about somebody who is educated here, influenced by Christianity, and that presentation is a description of indigenous African religion. Why would you concede Equiano's point and call that Judeo-Christian when clearly what he's describing is indigenous African religion uninfluenced by, as yet uninfluenced by the West, and therefore uninfluenced by Judeo-Christian values?
I take the point entirely, and I understand where we're going with this. There is a religion which his forefathers practiced, which he was part of. And the closest, if I can concede, is something that sounds more like a Leviticus type, Judeo-Christian. That's why I use the term. But if I say to them, they practice Omenala. Omenala, if you like, is the Igbo indigenous practice, which
That's
means...
what I would have liked to hear you say.
Omenala is like if you literally wreck the place, not only are you discriminating against the person, the land itself is become an abomination. And
all right, we've got a call on the line. 4944. Oh, someone's gone. Okay, sorry, Brother Paul on the line. 4944, you must have some patience. You can't just ring and then go because you don't come in straight away. Yeah, Brother Paul?
Yeah, good morning, Kwame. Good morning, Cecil, and good morning, Justice.
Good afternoon, as it now is. welcome, my brother.
It's afternoon already, Paul. Goodness me. You're welcome.
Time flies. Thank you very much, Justin, for actually making this appointment.
Can you speak more in the phone,
Liberation and your interjection with Cecil.
Brother Paul, can you speak more in the phone?
Absolutely on point and very informative. Learned a lot of things this morning. I just think we must have more of this. Justice, how do you feel, right? That area where you're born, we know as Nigeria. how important is that area, finding some stability? How important is that to black people around the world, or is there no connection or no importance? How important is it for them to find some sort of agreement and some stability so that they can maybe influence and connect back with others, black people on the planet?
Well, Paul, you asked the most important question I've heard for a long time. Where Biafra is situated is the trigger of Africa. That's very interesting, isn't it? If you draw a map of Africa and the southern part of Africa becomes a gun, a barrel of gun, where Biafra is actually the trigger of Africa. And the people that lives in that part of the world believe in live and let live. They're hardworking. I wouldn't say they're intelligent, because that annoys some people. Given the opportunity, they believe other parts of Africa could also develop. They'll be the engine for developing rest of Africa. Now, Brother Cecil also mentioned earlier on, he heard about the word Calabar. Because
we have Calabar.
Calabar in Jamaica. Okay. So majority of people who were grabbed from African coast, West Africa especially, some people say put as much as 60% came from this part of Africa. They were taken from the bite of Biafra.
Yes.
So genetically, what I call genotypic Biafrans are scattered all over the world. So I would live to see a stable Biafran nation, which would then act as a ripple for the development and stability in other parts of Africa, so that our brothers and sisters from other parts of the world can connect. They say, I'm going to see the historical settings that made my forefathers. I'm going back to see it in CBD, the writings that they used to have, which has now virtually disappeared. I'm going to listen to their culture. I'm going to listen to their music, but in a place which is stable for them to go to, and not when they arrive they'll be kidnapped. So I believe Biafra will be one of those countries that will provide that platform for the renaissance which we need for all black nations throughout the world.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. You see, you know why I asked that? Because, I years ago I had a computer business, and I used to have, I had a shop on the high street as well. I used to have clients come in there, repair their machines, and often we would have conversations. Two very interesting men used to come into the shop, and I wish I'd remember his name, but one, I know he came from St. Lucia. He had traveled throughout Africa, extensively Nigeria. He'd written books. And he actually was the first one to tell me, and which I fully didn't understand at the time, but he said that once that area gets itself together, the black people around the world will rise, and I never really understood what he was saying at the time. I didn't have the information I had now, so I didn't really didn't understand what he was talking about, but it was interesting just listening to him. Secondly, I remember a Jamaican elder, telling me a story about the Morant Bay Rebellion, and he told me that apparently, according to him, I can't confirm this information, but he said that one of the part of the information he was reading, it was one of the plantation owners had written a diary, and he had said that the language which they were using to plan the rebellion was in Igbo. He explained to me that on the ground level in Jamaica, there were a lot of Igbos, and in the hills, it was more people from Ashanti and Ghana region. I haven't confirmed that, but he sat with me for hours and he explained it all to me. And these are the reasons. And another thing, I was listening to a radio station in America, and one of the men was saying that he had actually received money some years ago to go to university, and there was a time when certain Nigerian governments would send money to support, African Americans in their education. And I just thought that was all brilliant, and and it's unfortunate that these things and people have turned to propagate themselves and line their own pockets instead of thinking on a national and global scale. And I hope that one day these wishes can come true and Biafra could be free again. And we could see some of that worldly type thinking instead of individuals lining their own pockets.
Yes, I fully agree. There's word "unu" that comes to my head as soon as you mention Igbo words and so on. Yeah. There are phraseologies, there are the thing that I'm going to yam you up and something like that, yamming this up. All these are from Igbo land.
So what does "unu" mean?
"Unu" means a plural for you. Yeah. So "unu this, "unu that" is the same thing. Yeah, there are so many words which are linked.
And yam?
Yam is the food we eat, but if you therefore turn into eating, I'm going to yam this, so yam it. Yamming, just eating, isn't it? Okra is an Igbo word. So there's so many words. I can get a list for you where it's, but it's not so much of that. Haiti, which was the first African indigenous, if you like, independent state, who fought the French, who fought the Americans, who fought everybody, and up to today they have been conquered. But they've been conquered economically. Biafrans were recognized by Haiti because they know that majority of people who are from Haiti came from the Biafra originally. So I want a docking, an understanding between Biafrans and particularly our West Indian brothers and sisters, let alone those in America. So there will be a renaissance, in my belief, once we get this act right. Thank you.
All right, there's another call on the line, 0366. Can you come in, please?
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm a Nigerian of Igbo origin, born in Lagos, grew in Lagos, and schooled here in region. But I've been listening and following what all justice is saying, and I just want to make just a short contribution. First of all, I'm very impressed with his insights, the way he has broken everything down and made it clear to people listening. But I think we're underestimating the role the British played. Even though we keep mentioning it, but let's not disconnect. At every juncture, the problem is coming from Britain. It's not. Listen, had it been they did not tamper with that Aburi. You see the part where he talked about where the Igbos said in Aburi we stand, in Aburi we stand. It was the British who were in Lagos because they saw that as that if that Aburi stands, it will mean to the world that it means Africans can actually get something right on their own, can actually get it right. So they sat in Lagos. They were not only they did not only sit in Lagos. Even the Nigerian army, from the way I understood it, was infiltrated by even British mercenaries. So it's not just enough to just see the political. They infiltrated the army and fought the Biafrans and made sure they subdued the Biafrans. So they are still doing the same till now, till today. It's not. I don't know why people don't talk about these things. We tend to make it look like it is our own disagreement. I don't really, even the Northerners. I'm saying this based on my own understanding. If you remove the British influence in Nigeria, Nigerians will agree. We'll just overnight, you'll see that things will work in Nigeria. Nigeria will never work because of British influence. It is very, very important. We must not underestimate it. This is the real origin of our problem. And they want to sustain their hold on the resources inside Biafra. The only way to do it is to use their stooge up north. They can never achieve that with the Easterners, obviously. So they have to sustain their control through those in the north, that's the Hausa Fulani, and who let me use the word, they've kind of shortchanged them over the years, thinking that they are controlling us. But if Nigeria breaks up, those people are shortchanged because they are limited in terms of education. There are a lot of other things Justice did mention, like quota system. There are too many reasons why the Biafrans want to pull out beyond just what has happened before. All the policies upon which Nigeria is governed is designed to limit people from the east. if I'll mention just a few names, is it sports? All the Nigerians have given Nigeria its good names come from the Biafran territory. People are afraid to say, is it football? You talk of JJ Okocha, you talk of Kano, you talk anywhere you look at it, the good name Nigeria has outside the shores of Nigeria comes from people of Biafran origin. You were mentioned by Olauda Ikwano. Somebody just called in and talked about those who were trying to revolt against in the plantation with Igbo language. But the credit you will never see. But inside of Nigeria, the credit is not given. The Biafrans are made to look like minorities. The Igbos are made to look like minorities. This is the brain work of Britain, because Britain knows this. They know this very well. That the day Biafra become liberated, Biafra is going to be the first black nation that will lead by example, and the black people around the world can actually see. So there's dignity. There could be a black nation with dignity.
Okay, my brother, I think you've made a point, yeah?
Yeah.
Rouse up, brother Adi on the line, brother Adi.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Brother Adi.
I mean, you okay?
I'm wonderful. And yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. What you're talking about this afternoon, I mean, for me, generally, I'm afraid that Nigeria is a place that's not really beneficial for the people who live there. It's not. I mean, you know, when the British came there, prior to when the British came there, the whole place, the whole region, I can speak for the southern part, you know, there was electricity.
There was what?
They came there, the
electricity.
Put out.
So you're saying there was electricity in southern Nigeria before the British arrived?
Of course. You know, before the inception of so-called in 1914, under the Lady Lugard, who was apparently the Governor General, what he was. You know, his wife, who had the idea to make up the place called Nigeria, what we know as Nigeria today. Way before that. There was electricity, there was organization, there was all type of good things going on. Now today, it's a complete fallacy. I'm afraid to say this is a country that's heading nowhere. I'm sorry to say that. You know, and the gentleman that made a statement about the Delta oil, you know, sponsored the first attack in '77. No, that's far from true, because I was there. I was one of the organizers, and I'm showing you my age now, brother Kwan. That is far from true. What he's saying there is true. They're using the money to build a new federal capital, which they started in 1980, in the mid-80s or early 80s. Yeah, they use the money to build Abuja. Yeah, that's where all the money that belongs to the people of the Delta, as the gentleman in the studio say and the caller say, rather than the money going to them, to the people in the East, in the Niger Delta, the Biafra people. They never contribute to the first act in '77. Not one iota. No. That was self-sponsored by all the Yoruba people and the chiefs and everybody, and of course the diaspora among the Black American community as well. That's where the money for that came. The money never came from the Niger Delta. So that's something that I need to correct.
Thank you, Adi. I didn't actually say that the money for the first act came from the. Now, I didn't specify. I said the reconstruction after the war started in Lagos. Yeah. Did not start where the war was fought. Yeah, not just the first time the stadium was built. These were after the war. Bridges were built in Lagos. I wonder if all that money came from one particular tribe. You may have organized Festac. Well done. But I said, as an example, there was there were infrastructure put in place after the war, right? When you survive a war, like a Marshall Plan, Second World War, you go and rebuild where the war devastated. You don't go and build it in a capital which didn't see a single destruction. Well, which wasn't as devastated as the Eastern was. So if you understood what I said, that it was. The first time may have been an example. I said after the war was was developed, but also the stadium, bridges, all this were built, and then, as quite rightly alluded to, a brand new capital. Do you know how much it costs to build a capital? Now, I don't believe one particular tribe gave the money, other than if it didn't come from the oil. You cannot build a brand new capital without the amount of oil money. In fact, it was Gawan who said we now have more money than we know what to do with it after the war, because there's an oil boom. So if you misunderstood what I said, it's not really the intention. The intention is that the eastern part could have been rebuilt better after the war to prevent the current situation we're having. Thank you.
One small point on Festac. I'm afraid the Nigerian government, wherever the money came from, did pay for Festac. That was funded by the Nigerian government. A friend of mine, somebody called Ron Phillips, who's since died, was appointed the initial coordinator for Festac here in London, and they eventually dismissed him and appointed somebody else. But it was run by the Nigerian government and paid for by the Nigerian government. People went from the diaspora, but we didn't. We might have got. No, we didn't pay to pay for it.
Yeah, the other thing to say, Adi, you're absolutely right. Is the British role, maybe we haven't talked about it enough in this program, but I was just outlining the history that led to the war and where we are. There's a lot more to discuss.
Yeah, I agree that, and I've never myself understood it fully, just how malign the British role was around the time of the Civil War, and still is to this day, and Royal Dutch Shell, between Holland and the UK government, are really wicked forces inside of that situation.
And so therefore we're organizing lectures, which is at the Goldsmith University Hospital. Sorry, see, I'm hospital in the mind. Goldsmith University of London. That's in Lewisham Way, New Cross. If you look in the Facebook, you'll be there on the 11th of August. It's called the Biafran Education Awareness Day, BEAD lectures. We're beginning to help our people to understand exactly what went down. So, Ade, you'll be welcome, and anybody else who wants to know more.
Hello, my friend. Could I ask you a question? What are you looking? Are you looking for succession? To break away?
There's a word called succession. It's actually secession, which people try to force to label to Biafrans. We are not seceding. We are restoring our country, which was taken from us. Yeah. So, to do that,
which preceded
Nigeria, was if you look in the ancient maps, 15th, 16th century, you see the word Biafra. Nigeria wasn't anywhere near there. So you can't say Biafra is seceding when it's restoring itself. But that's another argument. That's why we need all these discussion and lectures.
So the place called Odua, which is Yoruba land, so I mean, you're right there. I agree with you. None of this. If you look at the map, pre-1914,
yes,
all the two places I alluded to that actually existed there.
Yes,
and you see, the danger is these things. They say what goes around comes around. Things after they come back and revisit.
Yes,
what we get in signs of what is happening over the last 20 years or so. That's factory. This is what happens.
Yes, we're not saying a Dudwa shouldn't form their own, but we don't carry on being killed in a country where we're supposed to be ours. The killing has been on since 1945, 53, 66, 67 to 70, and it's still happening up to, as I talk to you this minute. People who are of Biafran origin, not alone, are being killed mercilessly, remorselessly, with impunity. And the only way around it is to have a referendum to say, I no longer want to be a Nigerian, or I want to be a Nigerian. That is really a solution, unless you think it's a good idea to keep on spilling innocent blood.
Okay. I mean, you blame the British. I mean,
I'm not blaming the British. I'm saying
no.
There's a need to have a referendum in Nigeria. I'm not blaming anybody. I just say Biafrans want out, but you call it secession. We say we want restoration.
So they actually didn't. They didn't have a referendum pre to 1914. There wasn't none of that. There wasn't no concession to ask the people.
If you left them, if you left the people what they wanted to do, they won't voluntarily say, we like to be killed. Just give them a chance to decide how they want to be governed. And the United Nations Charter agrees that indigenous people have a right to self-determination. End of story, really.
Exactly. I mean, for example, you could look at the Balkans, Eastern Europe, right? There was a place called Yugoslavia there. Now it's broken up into 3 different places.
And they're winning the World Cup. So one day Biafra will be in the World Cup. Yeah.
So this is what might happen. I'm afraid this is what might happen in Nigeria.
Indeed.
I'm sorry to say that.
I hope it's done peacefully, because I'll survive the last war. We don't need it. We just need a referendum. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, instead of break let
me just say this and come off the line. Yeah, the more I'm informed, and the more I learn, the more I realize. This is my personal realization: is that Africa and that region, it's like someone said earlier, and it's not just about the history or the romanticizing of it. I think that it's absolutely important to acknowledge that if the root can't repair itself, if the root is broken or rotten, then the leaves will eventually fall off, the branches will disappear, and the tree will eventually die. And I think the responsibility the Africans on the continent have must be understood, because I begin to realize that, in actual fact, I absolutely know that the behavior which is affecting us around the world, which is common, it's not uncommon, is directly connected to what's going on in Africa, and nobody can tell me any difference. I found the evidence, and I can see it quite clearly. So our history, we can't compare ourselves to the Chinese. We can't compare ourselves to the Asians. We have to look at ourselves as being the first. We have to look at ourselves as being the creators. We have to look at ourselves as being the most important people on the planet. And it's so important. I really do understand the burden the Africans on the continent need to recognize that they have for Africans around the world. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, because the University of Nigeria, which is cited in Biafra land, became the University of Biafra. The motto is to restore the dignity of man. Guess what they're trying to get at? Is to make sure the black people dignity is restored, and it's through education. Thank you.
All right.
I'm sorry. Is there another call? I'm sorry to take it back down to this, but somewhere in your presentation, wonderful presentation, you started to get on to Boko Haram, and I was interrupting you only because I thought it was out of place at that particular moment. But I wonder if you could say something to me and to the listeners more about Boko Haram and what that really is.
Okay. Yeah. Boko Haram is like, imagine the Christian scenario where you are the born-again, really evangelical wing of Christianity.
Fundamentalism.
Okay, fundamentalism is the word I'm looking for. The Islam have their own agenda. They want the whole Nigerian Islamized. Yes. And it goes back to prior to British arriving, where there was Islamic jihad going on, which the British put a stop to. Yes. And their dream is to dip the Quran in the Atlantic Ocean. It's really simple. Go down to the southern coast of Nigeria and take your Quran and dip it in the Atlantic Ocean. Don't need to kill people for it. But it's a euphemism to spreading Islam right to the coast. And that is still on. And Nigeria at the moment, every single high post, be the head of military, head of air force, head of navy, wherever you are, see, head of important post in Nigeria, you have to be Muslim. And it's impinging now on the rest of Nigerian, where villages are being sacked, meaning being burnt, destroyed, killed, pillaged, so that they become Islam. So it's the Quran or your land, or you die. So it's Fulani herdsmen are driving the agenda now where Boko Haram left. They're now more deadly. So Nigerians are feeling the heat. But this killing happened 50 years ago about the Biafrans, in the mid-belt. They were passing through mid-belt, they're being massacred. And then it was kosher, it was easy to accept as Biafrans, good riddance. But now, that killing mentality of dipping the Quran in the Atlantic Ocean is still ongoing. And we need to understand that that's not the way. The way is to say to the people, do you want to live together in peace, so that we can move on. If you want to be Islamic, become Islamic. If you don't want to be Islamic, leave them alone.
Yeah.
So this is really, I mentioned Boko Haram because they think Western education is dangerous. But therefore they do not want to be educated, and therefore there's a disparity between those who can make things happen in Africa and those who want to have the traditional way of running things. The ironic thing about Boko Haram is that you use mobile phones, use AK-45, use all those things which are Western education created, and you still don't want Western education. Thank you.
All right. It is said that in 2008, the CIA said that Nigeria will split into 4 different countries by 2015. What do you know about that?
Indeed. So it's a prophecy which is almost fulfilled. Well, they knew Nigeria ceased to be a country on the 6th of July 1967 when they invaded Biafra. That's really when Nigeria fell apart, because the Aburi was negated, and once you decided you're no longer going to live by a code of honor, a code of conduct, there's no agreement you're going to have that was going to hold water. And also Islamic, they have, I think, tequila. There's something they believe in, that you can lie to your opponent one day and change your mind and decide what you want to do. They become useful idiots to you. So this nonsense has to stop. People are no longer going to fall for it. Biafrans want to be out, and they need to be out, and it's up to Nigeria to be 3, 4, whatever number. It's not really our concern. But Nigeria ceased to exist when they attacked Biafra, haven't killed them before the war started. And they're still killing them.
Brother Kwame, could I say something as regarding the Boko Haram quickly before you ask it?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think their recreation, the gentleman that's speaking there is right. I believe there's somebody in the north there that is actually, sponsoring them. And I mean, he's talking about arms that they use in AK-47. Well, of course, it's regulated through the Trans-Sahel highway. It's easy for them, to get, because there's no border control. It's easy to travel through the Sahara Desert. And as you know, the northern Nigeria is on the bastion of the Sahel.
All right.
All of that area is littered with ammunition. Littered.
Okay, Brother Adi.
Through Gaddafi.
Brother Adi, we have another call on the line. 6459. 6459, just before Rush Rushing come in. 6459.
Greetings. This is Kofi, calling from Princess Risborough, close to Wendover. I just wanted to make a bit of an inclusion or a contribution to the show. And my point of view is, we have what I like to call the African challenge, and that obviously includes all black people. And what we find is many a times, we have a situation and many are keen to know what happened, and therefore the solution is sort of overshadowed by the actual problem, the challenge we're trying to resolve. So for instance, we sat here this morning, we've discussed all the atrocity that has been, but we have just a small time for the solution. I think that the solution should sort of get more time. Moving on from that point, we've got obviously the Fulani, the Boko Haram, of course, the government doing whatever they're doing in Biafra and Nigeria. The question I want to ask Brother Justice is, who's supplying the Fulani and Boko Haram with these ammunitions? Because from a military point of view, I used to be in the army, and you had to go to the arms depot to, sign for your ammo. So they've got the weapons. Okay, who's supplying the ammo? And there's a saying in account that if you want to know, the benefactor of a problem, then you have to. So if you want to know why the problem is being caused, then you have to find out who the benefactor is. And in this case, of course, the Fulani and Boko Haram are doing whatever they're doing, as well as the Nigerian government, as it seems, to sort of harass the Biafran people. However, what we need to look at, who benefits in the long run? What's the bigger picture? 5 years on, 10 years on, 15 years on? Who's benefiting? That's where the solution should come from. Because while we're too busy sort of nitpicking within ourselves in that small area, we need to realize there's a bigger picture where someone else is benefiting. So that's what I think we need to look at more, and that's what I'd like to contribute to the show. And to add to that, at some point I'd like to have the contact of Brother Justice as well, to have a chat about other things that I think he may be interested in. And greetings to everyone at galaxy.
Okay, Medasi.
Thank you.
Greetings, my brothers. Blessed greetings.
1 second, brother. You want to respond to that quickly?
Kofi, thank you for calling in. I personally don't know who's supplying the weapons, but it's interesting what you said at the end, that whoever stands to benefit from the end result of what they're trying to achieve may have a hand in it. So those who want to Islamize the whole of Africa, it's not just once Nigeria falls and become Islamized, then I don't see what other country in Africa that can stand the amount of killings. You see, they're attacking from the west, they're attacking from the east. Remember what's happening in Kenya? So the whole thing is trying to spread down to Islamize the whole of Africa. Maybe I'm biased, so I don't know who's giving them the weapons, but at the end of the day, we need to decide what the whole Pan-Africans want. To stop the killing of your fellow human beings. The weapons are made outside Africa. We survived slavery, colonialism, neo-colonialism, paper independence. There comes a time when you say enough is enough. Let's form African indigenous countries that will sustain every African, both those in Africa and those in diaspora, to restore the dignity of black man. Thank you.
All right. Rasha Singh?
That's good.
Rasha Singh?
Listen, my beloved brothers. Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, Brother Kwame. First, I'd like to say, in the presence of the Almighty Supreme Creator of heaven and earth, who created the first man, the first woman upon the continent that is called today Africa, endowed him with intellectual knowledge, the spirituality that connects him with the universal laws of creation. I say blessings to you, the great African, and also to Galaxy, to yourself, Brother Kwame, and to our wonderful brothers in there. I hear him keep on posing questions. Remember, since the 1400s, all we need to do is go back 600 years. What came together in Spain against the Moors that was ruling Europe and educating Europe? Remember, they were also Islamic. Well, as you know, the ancient Treaty of Rome that was signed and brought the Confederate straight, the so-called Knight Templates, the Red Cross, and all of them came together. And what they declared, my beloved brothers, is that everything that was African must be destroyed. The people of Africa must be destroyed. So we know who they are. We forget that the dragon, the Chinaman, who empowered the beast, the European Confederate States, with the gunpowder, the cannon, to slaughter all indigenous, including Africans and Indians all over creation. We know about that. So when we look at today's reality and see the part that Britain has played in the whole administration of the slave enslavement, the African, we also know that the Constitution is what continues the misery of the African all over. We cannot be respected if our land that we own, we have no access to our resources. How can we be respected? And right now, we look at an island of Jamaica, where according to the 1962 Constitution, the Queen of England still owns not only the land, the resources, the people, but she also makes the decision, even up to this day, to the Governor General. So when Jamaicans, we have 5 million estimated Jamaicans abroad, we have 2.7 million Jamaicans here. But without the diaspora engaging in our respective regions, without the Africans engaging within our respective region and realizing that the constitution of our respective region is what denies us of the empowerment that Africa was incarnated by the Almighty Supreme Creator of heaven and earth. So you see, the African, my beloved brother Kwame, and people say I keep on talking. This is not passion. This is not passion. The reality of this is this. On the 1st of August in England, you have the reparation, the Maximiza, coming together of the African family. Because of the embarrassment of what's now being revealed, what England is still doing right up in the 21st century. Don't you think it is time for us to come together on the common reality? Because what's been happening? The Pan-Africans, for over 100 years, they've panned out everything of the problems of Africa. But we still haven't reached the glory land. The civil rights movement came in, and we civil rights every law of the white man, but we still haven't got justice. But we want peace in civil society. Without justice, my black brothers and sisters, there can be no peace. And without coming together in your respective region and realizing that there's a European constitution, look at the British. Half of the British England team are Africans, and the majority of the French team are Africans. They just won the World Cup. These are the things that we speak about, that the enslaved are becoming enslaved and more enslaved because we are making the image of the white man and making it feel that it's good when it's not.
Rasha Singh.
Time for us to, yes, my brother.
Yeah, can you give out the details of the petition so that people can go to it? Because we have, 2 minutes left and I need to close the show.
The petition is to safeguard. This is an historical petition that brings together the diaspora to the respective region to protect our industry that can eliminate poverty, it can eliminate crime, it can enrich our nation and bring us wealth and health. This is the ganja that they're trying to take away and want we to become shackled slavery in the 21st century by we must take our contract to farm for Canadian company, British company, American company, Israel company, and the Chinaman company.
What's the address of the petition, Brother Rasha Singh?
The web page is www.change.org/P, the letter P for Prime Minister, /Mr. Andrew, the name Andrew, Holness, which is spelled Holness. He is the Prime Minister of Jamaica, whose government has sold out the interests of our indigenous ganja by giving contracts, licensing to foreign companies, when we, who knows this plant more than anyone, are totally wants to be cotton growers so the white man can profit. Well, they want us to grow our ganja as contract slaves to these big institutions.
All right.
So without the 15,000 signature, my brother, we will not change the direction of this government, which we have to.
Okay,
They can be impeached.
All right. Okay, Brother Justice, yeah?
Yes.
Brother Russell Shin, he's calling from Jamaica.
Yes.
And there's a petition that launched here in the UK, which is to help the Jamaican farmers grow ganja, from a Jamaican perspective as opposed to from a European-centered perspective.
Yes.
What would be the situation in Biafra land if you became independent? Would you allow ganja to grow for medicinal purposes?
Well, when Biafra comes, we need to, in my humble opinion, we need to accommodate our brothers in the diaspora. We have to look at their needs. If what they want to grow is an indigenous crop, we have to make sure it's legitimized in a way that benefit not just them but the rest of the world. It is possible, but it's difficult now to speculate what it is they want and how it benefit us. There should be bilateral agreement.
What I'm trying to say, there's a growing movement at the moment to grow cannabis, ganja, marijuana for medicinal purposes, yeah?
Yes, yes.
As opposed to smoking, yeah?
Yes.
So what would...
So there are, from medical point of view, there might be pharmaceutical benefits for them. If you can confine them, refine them, and it's something that is legitimate. So it's not just growing it and causing some people to become poorer than they are and some become to be richer. So there's a need, any product can be, if it can be synthesized for the benefit of mankind, it will be possible for us to consider it. But I cannot comment as an individual what the government would do.
All right, I've got to leave it there, Ushing, yeah? So next week. All right.
Can I just remind folk of Friday's workshop at 336 Brixton Road? A sister, one of us, talking about Africans in the Caribbean after the end of enslavement, and in particular the busy and so on, and the role of that in the way we conducted our rituals and our spirituality.
Mm-hmm. Right. I don't know.
7 o'clock on Friday.
Right. I don't know how you feel, Brother Cecil, but do you think he should come back in a Reverend part 2 next week?
If the brother is available, there's enough more aspects of it to explore.
What do you think? Are you available?
I'll do my best and find a time.
Yeah? Right. No, because to me, there's a lot of healing needs to be done, you know?
Absolutely.
And I think there's a lot of resentment with people from Biafra, with the general Nigeria, and probably the other way as well. And I think, you know, there's a lot of healing needs to be done, personally speaking.
Due to lack of understanding of what actually went down.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the lecture's been set up, so people can begin to understand. Perhaps with understanding, you can empathize better of what happened.
All right. So for all of these,
and Islam needs to understand that it can't be spread by the sword.
No,
I mean, it's that simple.
Yeah.
And for all you people who's trying to call in just now, right? You need to call in early next week so we can get all the points on the table. Because as you can see, I started the program early.
Yeah.
So to get
still enough things to discuss.
Right. So we're gonna carry on next week. Yes.
Okay.
All right. So Empress Culture is in the house, and I'm gonna leave it for her.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you too.
Yeah. Oh, we are Biafra. We love Biafra. We are Biafrans. We love Biafra. I say we are Biafrans. We love Biafra. We are Biafra. We love Biafra. We show the whole world how much we love Biafra, our beloved father's land. We love and cherish. We resolve the whole world how much we love Biafra, our beloved father's land. We love and cherish. Biafra's story is the most touching and painful story in the world. Biafrans have been killing every day and night, but nobody is talking. Everywhere silent. We should be ashamed of ourselves. Hey, we said we are Christians, but we do nothing to help the Biafrans. When they are killing Biafrans, we done nothing to help them. Whether you help or not, we Biafran, we stand and protect our land, because we love Biafra, and we will die for Biafra. Oh, we are Biafra. We are Biafra. We love